one Americanism I'm surprised I haven't heard like Lemmy or someone rant about is the fact that we call the food that you get at a venue concessions. It's actually very bizarre
weird.
if you think about
I
it.
didn't understand that for the first 4 or 5 years I was hearing that term.
I think there's millions of people who have just never had to think about it and are just like, yeah, that's just what like snacks are called, concessions.
We're just conceding that it's grand.
Yeah, it's such a weird verbiage. We're conceding food to you for an exorbitant price.
Yeah.
It's Alex!
All right, well, it's episode 291 of View from 202. It is, as always, Brit, Cork, Sam, and Peaches. Ironically, in a different setting now. The nicest actual proper studio that we've ever been in here. We went and booked the fanciest mansion in all of Brooklyn to record what we are referring to as the final episode of View from 202.
That's right. You know that famous picture you see that gets posted every so often on like the architecture subreddits with the clock tower or whatever? We're not in that building, but we're very close to it.
The famous picture that's seen on some of the architecture subreddits. I like that.
You'll miss these bits.
Yeah. Some people used to, in years past, I like to imagine they'd say, the painting or the book or the the thing that was posted to the subreddit a lot of times. That's where we are. Now, this is episode 291. I do feel a little bit like, A-Rod ending his career on 696 home runs a bit. It's like you couldn't just hold on for a little bit more in this. You're retiring mid-season. You can't hit 4 more.
Well, we went like 89 extra episodes.
89? What happened to 89?
Well, we were supposed to be
202.
202 and done.
Yeah, that would have been some clean numerology.
Yeah, exactly.
We do need to improve our numerology these
We
days.
were having that discussion yesterday.
That's true.
We made an executive club run if we want to get our listeners parasocial one last time.
We do. We should. It's important right off the bat to reassure everyone that we do exist outside of the recordings and we do actually still see each other. And
No, we're like the Mythbusters. We actually are not friends outside of the recordings.
A strictly professional and slightly tense
It'll become much more
relationship.
clear when people listen back to the previous episodes that we
true.
did not hang out outside of this podcast.
Yeah. But lo and behold, here we are. I say final with somewhat scare quotes because, it sounds a little bit extreme. But we have decided to come and convene here to put a bow on the season that never was in View from 202, our 10th season. You may remember, you may have noticed that we last recorded in March of 2025, 2 episodes into this season, and, never really got back into it. I think regular listeners may not be totally surprised by what that is. And the short answer to why we didn't get back into it is that there's not any acute dramatic reason we stopped recording. Nobody was hit by a car. Nobody got in an argument. But we just fell off of our regular rhythm and slowly kind of did not find our way back into the recording studio over the course of the year. And a couple months later, we have come here to acknowledge that, and instead of just seeping into the sunset or quietly with no comment, come and do a bit of a retrospective about this podcast that we started all the way back in 2016 as the third podcast on the scene at the time about the New York Red Bulls, and how the podcast has changed, how the club culture has changed, how the club's results and general environment around the club has changed, how soccer in America and sports culture has changed. Listeners may know that, we were kind of beginning to revolve around these themes a bit more in our recent episodes, more than what was going on the field. And my hope is that by finally having a concentrated space to talk about these things, these conversations can be a little bit more pointed rather than just finding any excuse to avoid talking about Wiki Carmona any longer than we have to. Although I'm sure in a year's time we'll still be forced to talk about him a little bit. But with that, should say, how's everyone feeling on this fine December day at the end of 2025 as we embark on this 291st episode?
Well, in the meantime, since I think our last recording, I've gotten Cork kind of into skiing, so
Yeah.
we may be doing Lindsey Vonn fan club activities moving forward.
Oh, is she still skiing?
Is she still skiing? She's 41 and she's ripping it.
I was going to say, wasn't she famous from like the 2006 Olympics or something? Genuine question.
Sure,
I don't know.
I don't remember how far back she's been competing in the Olympics, but yeah, she's been around for a while.
Great. Thrilled for you.
You know.
Well, in the time that we last recorded...
Hold on. But the deep cut, though, I have to make sure I put this out there. The deep cut listeners will know I'm a Candida Vex guy, so we can go
Okay.
on. Yeah.
Well, in the time since we last recorded, I got engaged.
Oh, that's big news.
Yeah. No, it'd be more dramatic if I was expecting a child or something.
Yeah,
we could
that's
say
true.
that's why we're not recording anymore. But no, I'm just slacking off for other reasons.
You're waiting for the universal child care to hit before you announce that.
Oh yeah, Mr. Mamdani, you have 3 years. Get it into shape. But Cork, Sam, how you guys feeling?
I'm good. I have gotten into skiing, as my host introduced for me. But otherwise, just I don't know, just doing my thing. I'm still here. You guys still see me online more than I guess the rest of y'all. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
That's right. I've been avoiding Twitter until it becomes nationalized. So
Do we want it to be nationalized at this point? It's kind of already is nationalized.
Yeah.
Would it be
Right.
nationalized in the U.S. or is that just like an EU nationalization thing?
maybe it's a UN, an internationalization.
Yeah.
Do we have internationalizations?
Interpol really fell off. Not the band, but the concept. It feels like you really heard about Interpol a lot when we were kids.
You really read about it in like the Dan Brown novels a lot.
Yeah,
You know?
it felt very important that there was some sort of final level of police that you could appeal to.
I think the one thing that, I mean, for me at least, I feel like I've made the swing all the way into baseball pretty solidly. I think all four of us have really kind of leaned back into it. Maybe you three with the Mets specifically, and me back to the Yankees. I don't know if it feels more appropriate as I get older to go back into maybe a little lower energy sport. And I feel like that's what's taken up the last 9 months for me.
Yeah, the age factor has not been lost on me with shifting towards baseball.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I tried to get us all together to do an NBA Cup final episode, and that didn't pan out. But I have to say the Knicks have been kind of holding my attention pretty hard as well. So
Yeah. Well, and we've also started playing baseball a lot more too, while we're still playing soccer. But I think like that does speak to, I think, one of the bigger transitions that has happened in the last decade a little bit, that I would even argue that I think baseball, maybe it's just among millennials or our milieu a little bit, but I do feel like baseball has started to take on a little bit of a more similar role in sports culture than that what soccer was serving around 2015-ish. I do feel like there's something nice and methodical and ritual and ritual, I guess is the word I'm looking for, about watching and tuning into a baseball season, that a lot of that used to be served for me by going to soccer like every other week at Red Bull Arena, which is, I think, no longer really the case, as listeners may.
I think the accessibility of that live experience of baseball is also kind of, like you can buy a baseball ticket for as much as a soccer ticket.
Well, you can certainly still buy a Red Bulls ticket whenever you
Well, no, I mean, but in terms of like, that being a sport that can fill that niche too, you can't like just go to MSG or something to watch a Knicks game in the same like ritualistic way you can like pop up a last minute Mets ticket or something.
Those are like the
and
only two like New York area sports where you could kind of just go on a
Affordably
whim
go, yeah.
and it'd be like under $50.
or like Islanders or something, I guess.
I guess
so,
maybe
though,
maybe
now
maybe,
that
maybe the
they've-
Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah.
But
Nets, yeah, because
yeah.
like the Liberty is getting kind of expensive now, apparently.
Yeah.
High demand. They don't have as many games, but I think that leads us well into one question that I wanted to consider for this retrospective of sorts, which is like, what was View from 202? Because I think like we actually started this podcast, I think, with a kind of specific vision in mind. Although I don't think we announced it too explicitly at the time. But I do think that like this aspect of club culture and sports culture was always sort of like a part of why we wanted to sit down and start doing this podcast. But in a different way than, say, the sort of content you would see around 2015 or so that like Copa 90 or like MLS Digital would put out, where they would send like Rachel Bonetta or like someone to like go and hang out with a supporters group for a day, or like Copa 90, I guess, would go and like travel to like Argentina or something for a day, a little bit more intense. We were not obviously going to be like that explicit about being like, oh, here's like behind the curtains look of like what it's like to be in like the most intense part of the Red Bulls fandom. But I do think that part of the vision for why we wanted to start doing this is really to kind of like give a sort of window into a certain type of fandom of supporting the Red Bulls, but also MLS a little bit more generally, that I think was very tied into like what I was trying to say about baseball now, which was like a sort of kind of specific vision of attachment to a sports team that was devoted. You were a diehard fan, but you weren't necessarily in the supporter section every week. Because going back in a time machine, in 2016 when we started this podcast, there were a couple real factors that I think made us think that it would be an interesting project for us to undertake. Really just for fun, not really expecting to make a big career out of it or anything like that, which is that at the time, the Red Bulls media environment was, I guess, like the traditional media environment was that the Red Bulls were on MSG, and they had like a before and after show that was just like Cangelosi and Messing at the time, and that was pretty bare bones and minimal. It's like when MLS was still kind of paying the regional sports networks to carry the team. And then other than that, it was really, there were two podcasts, Seeing Red, which of course is still going on, and Red Bull Rant. And I think the way that we sort of sized it up, I don't know if we ever sat down and explicitly said this, is that Seeing Red was really geared at being sort of a sort of like a serious sort of talk show, so to speak. I don't know if serious is quite the right word, but like they were doing a little bit of a simulation of like what a WFAN show about the New York Red Bulls would sound like, where it was like a little bit more straight. Of course, they've had a different lineup over the years, but by and large, like throughout the whole time, Mark has been sort of the straight man host asking the questions, and then he's had a variety of different like analysts kind of coming in and giving answers, and they would have the interviews with players, with managers who would come on, and that was sort of like a little bit more of like the established like news sort of interview podcast. And then there was, and part of that as well is that like, you know, Seeing Red, I think also scanned for that reason like a little bit older, shall we say, not in a bad way, not in a good way, like in a neutral way, where it was trying to be like sort of the conventional media approach. And on the other hand, you had Red Bull Rant, who I think did scan a little bit younger, a little bit more casual. But we're definitely like more like New Jersey based, and you had like that vibe, like they were like into wrestling, and I think like just talked about watching games at like the watch parties. I think like over at that bar in Wayne, or maybe in like Hoboken. I can't remember. And then for that matter, I think Red Bull Rant was also, at least when we started, they would talk about like going to ESC things and South Ward things, which I think was good and like a good compliment to Seeing Red. But there was sort of a gap there of like, I felt like there were a lot of people going to games who were like kind of diehard fans going most weeks, not necessarily in the supporters club, maybe knows like a couple of the chants and the songs, but is going to be like a little bit more casual than that, and importantly are based in the city a little bit, and we felt that wasn't really like a visible part of the fan base. And I think really the precipitating factor as well was that NYCFC had just come into the scene. And I think I would have been hard pressed to admit it at the time, although I think it was kind of obvious. But I think like that was really like feeling like the pressure that like an NYCFC might like totally dominate like that perception of New York City soccer, of like, oh, if you're based in the city and not like the Seeing Red crowd or the Red Bull Rant crowd, like you should follow NYCFC. And of course we did not want that to happen.
And we also, I mean, like, I feel like this is maybe part of the broader feeling of American soccer culture at the time too, but like we also had the premise originally of like being kind of an evangelist for soccer, if you remember.
Well, I was just about to say it's kind of a, you know, when you put it like that, it becomes kind of a microcosm of what the entire U.S. soccer culture was at one point, which was this kind of mission-based thing where it's like, not only does your team have to win, but we have to be firing on all cylinders. We have to be making our own media. We have to be doing our projects, supporting team, making our tifos, and like, you know, Peaches just said, like the marketing has to be good. And you know, that was one of the things where, you know, perhaps Seeing Red reflected the broader American soccer culture and just kind of ethos a little stridently in a way that became kind of difficult to look at the prism of kind of New York soccer, especially when NYCFC came on the scene. That was, you know, one of the things about like what Brit just said, where it's like we have to defeat NYC on the field, but we also have to defeat them in the streets, on the
marketplace of ideas,
with sandwich boards, whatever that shit was. Oh my God. We have to be, you know, on top of everything that's, you know, part and parcel with doing MLS in the 2010s, which was, you know, for ordinary fans who, you know, thought they knew a little bit of what they're talking about, was starting a podcast.
It's very obvious, I think, that we wanted to set out to make sure RBNY was the intellectual team, and then NYCFC were the, I guess, like,
I mean, that was a little bit of it.
Meathead,
not to
nationalists, but
yeah, and that also I should spell out, in the spirit of just like putting everything on the table, in the chronology, that at this point the podcast was Sam, Peaches, and me, and then Cork joins in a few years later on. We meet Cork, of course, through doing the podcast and through
the whole thing.
Yeah,
but also I want to get back to like the original premise of the show, where like when we like kind of conceptualized this coming out of college, we were like, we're gonna bring one of our friends over to look at this silly thing at this soccer game to show that it's normal and that normal people do it, and then we could like get their thoughts on like what it's like to go to an MLS game, because it's still a novel experience. Then you know, it's kind of, in a way, right? I feel like this is the case with a lot of things culturally. Like soccer has made it, and like the monkey paws curled, and like this is kind of the reason why
it's not going anywhere. We don't have to, you know, especially with now what we've seen. You know, I guess to bring it full circle with NYCFC culture, like that the battlefields are empty. I mean, it's, you know, that sort of same, you know, kind of mindset that we were just laying out, where it's like, we have to make sure soccer survives. We have to make sure soccer culture thrives. That sort of impetus is just kind of gone, and everybody kind of knows it, but some people still choose to go through the motions, and this is our kind of big gesture of saying that we're kind of getting off the hamster wheel.
Yeah, or you know, acknowledge. And I should also say that one thing I forgot to say in our opening spiel as well is that you know, we're not destroying the printing press. We're not like going full Luddite and destroying the machinery. We reserve the right.
We're not doing a Butlerian jihad on podcasting equipment.
Maybe we should. But you know, we do reserve the right, with the express written consent of View from 202, to maybe pop on and do an occasional episode here and there. And we have indeed considered that many times. It just really hasn't happened over the last couple months. So hence why we're gathering to put a bow on this here. So you may still see an episode pop into your feed at some point in the future, but as we've said kind of previously in previous episodes, you should no longer expect a regular sort of cadence of us to talk about the Red Bulls week in, week out. But to this point, I think we've identified, so I have a thesis of like three main buckets of disillusionment, so to speak, that we've already dug up. three motivating factors that kind of were there in 2016 and 2019 and maybe even 2022 that are no longer there. One is sort of like the shared mission of American soccer that evolved over the years, but I think was still there to some extent until recently for us. Two is sort of like the looming specter of NYCFC, which in a similar way has kind of deflated in an anticlimactic way that I don't think anyone really expected.
Yeah.
And then third, I think
Crazy plot twist the way it happened.
Yeah, crazy anticlimax. The third, I think, is arguably the most straightforward. Is sort of the loss of coherence of like the team on itself on the field. I mean, you can maybe split this into two, as I think one is a slightly more on-field sort of look at like not only like the results, but also just like feeling a sense of continuity on the squad and like being part of the same club tradition. And then the other part is something that we've bemoaned a lot in our episodes up to this one, which is like the literal like match day experience and like culture emanating from the club comms and operations, which I think connects back to what we were talking about initially, which is like this sort of moment in time that this culture, this soccer culture, American soccer culture that was present when we started this. Peaches, you mentioned also joked that RBNY was the more intellectual club, so to speak. I don't know about that, but I do think it does.
I'm projecting, obviously.
It does behoove us to mention to do a shout out to the phenomenon or the scene once known as RBNY Twitter that used to exist, because it doesn't exist in many different ways now. But it occurs to me that one, this is something many people probably haven't thought about in a long time, or two, like at this point, I have no idea that it kind of existed, which was that in like 2014 to 16, 17, maybe even up to 18ish, like the main way people would really talk about the New York Red Bulls was there was a pretty lively Twitter scene, and then there was also Metro Fanatic as well, which I should say we kind of always considered ourselves a slightly different generation than that. But RBNY Twitter had this sort of very distinctive, like, irreverent, but like, certainly not like irony Twitter, but like lightly, softly irreverent, bookish vibe to it.
We weren't like the other girls.
Kind of, a little bit. I mean, I think like the defining texts of like of RBNY Twitter, the defining like tone of RBNY Twitter were the old videos that Jason RBNY would put together that were like always like movie spoofs, and they weren't they were pretty good. I mean, it's just like hilarious to imagine somebody putting this much effort into something now that we're like in the full AI slop era. But it was like the just classic simple task of like going in and making like a kind of good, kind of shitty Photoshop, or like a kind of good, kind of shitty video where like the charm was that you intentionally made the edit a little rough. And
part of that was that MLS, the era that MLS was in, as far as like the build out and just, how kind of the production values was much more amenable to that. It was a lot more congruent to do kind of like irreverent, goofy kind of content about wacky MLS 10 years ago than it is now, where the tone is so all over the place and like, mostly kind of drab with MLS now, that it's trying to pretend it's, the upper echelon of things with Lionel Messi and just 100% sincerity and pretending like they're the big leagues, when I don't know. I don't think we're getting the full juice of that, and they've lost that kind of older, kind of homespun, kind of, I hate this word, but authentic kind of, fan culture that used to exist. Now that kind of thing just feels really out of place.
It was a different kind of nerdiness, but what's the line? Also, the dead traditions still haunt the current MLS thing, where you mentioned there's this sort of like attempt to be like, oh, we're the best, but also like there's still this commitment to like irony.
You're a freaking sicko if you watch, the MLS game of the week.
Right.
Like, Oh yeah, they're still trying to pull.
The irony calibration is off.
Yeah, exactly. Where irony calibration's off is a good way to put it.
But then it was and this like period of MLS culture, like I think it was aware that it wasn't cool. It was never cool, but it felt a little bit more coherent in a sense.
Right.
I think like the sort of crowning piece of media that was put together that also kind of sums up like the convergence of like league media and like fans dorking out is that video that they put together, like MLS, the league put together, Mike McGee's Day Off.
I was thinking
where they got like all of the who's who in the league a little bit, including like Thierry Henry. I don't know, was Beckham in it too? I don't know.
No, that was after Beckham.
To do a Ferris Bueller parody,
right.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing was like you had that like mix of like MLS stars, like Jack McInerney, I think was in that video.
Yeah,
like you know.
But then it also
I was about to mention the Benny Feilhaber Sal Zizzo.
Oh yeah,
that was pretty
like,
good. Yeah,
stuff like that where it was like kind of like you just said, Peaches, where it was like there was a kind of orientation you had in MLS where it was like, oh, we know these guys aren't stars, but we still know who they are, and we're trying to like add some texture to these guys, and like that was very, kind of both ironic and sincere at the same time. Whereas now, every team is made up of their newest Polish U21 signing who nobody's heard of and is going to be sold in a year and a half, and like that coherence of MLS as kind of a organism exists so much less than it did 10 years ago. It doesn't help that there's 80 different teams now, but it's a whole other thing.
Yeah, and I think that the way that the league media evolved with the league is part of this story too, where MLS Digital itself was actually a pretty sizable operation until when was really the big cutback that they did, like 2019 or...
Yeah, well, when did Ariel Castillo leave? Like around then, like 18, 19ish?
It's hard to,
because she was like the last main host of like regular
that was
content
like the,
that wasn't like
video.
redundant with other stuff.
Right.
And then there was also the other round where like they fired Borg, and
that was like post-COVID or like in the thick of COVID.
Yeah.
But even like moving Borg off of like content side to doing more,
and the other Lawless brother.
Because I remembered watching the instant replay with Simon Borg.
Yep.
See you next time.
Yeah.
You know?
But all that to say is that like there is an element where, in hindsight, and even at the time, you kind of have to acknowledge that like this unified project of like feeling like, oh, we all got to be in this together to make soccer like make it inherently could not last forever, and it still has ended in a way that I didn't expect, where I think, as we've said before, the dog seems to have caught the car a little bit and no one is satisfied with it. We have a big American star in Europe who is like played at Milan and Chelsea. Like
we have a bunch of guys at like all the like blue chip Champions League clubs.
Really changed anything.
It doesn't really feel like that's changed much, and I don't know. And what were you gonna have?
Well, I think there was one element in the spirit of like thinking back on things that I think I would have been embarrassed to admit at the time. I think another element of it as well is that there was sort of this sense behind American soccer back then that it was really intertwined with like kind of just like it was like an alternative way of like following sports. I think it was like a very like still a hangover from like the Bush era, like
lowercase left of center.
Yes, like in 2008 there was they were selling, or 2010 I guess. There was U.S. Soccer was selling on their shop. They had jerseys that you could buy. It was the Confederations Cup kit, whatever that was. And one of the kits you could buy in addition to the team of actual players was like an Obama 08 jersey, which like in like a week they updated it to add a McCain one. But like at first it was like, like nobody batted an eye at that. That felt very intuitive to
you had Jim Rome and all that, like, soccer's for liberals and, pussies or whatever, and now it's Donald Trump getting the FIFA Peace Prize or
like
whatever.
Cash Patel wearing a Liverpool tie as he announces that
I
he's
mean, there was
doing a
even
purge.
like that that
You
period.
have Dabo Swinney's son playing for Venezia in Serie B.
There's like that period where they were doing the Gadsden flag snake or whatever.
That was fun. Yeah, that to their credit, U.S. soccer was legitimately first on that by like 6 months or something, and then the Tea Party blew up and took it over. They had to get rid of all that really quick. That's an alternate timeline where like we're in fourth term of Blue Dog Senator Clint Dempsey from Texas, waving the Gadsden flag. But I think like to go even one step further to like this culture that was wrapped around soccer at the time, I think there was almost like kind of this faith or this hope that like if soccer made it in America, that would either be a proxy or like a tell or like a causing agent for a sign that like our sports culture had changed more fundamentally overall, that like our sports culture was a little bit more Euro coded, a little bit, because Europe felt very liberal coded at this time, even though we all know it wasn't really. And that like if you can imagine America where soccer is popular, that's also a country that's like a little bit more chilled out and a little bit more like maybe listening to NPR a little bit more than it would have before. Whereas now it's obvious, like we see really starting with Atlanta taking off and being a big success, like the SEC-ification of MLS, and it's like, oh, soccer is hugely popular, and now it's just like another place that like college football culture has seeped into, and of course like American sports affected soccer more than soccer would affect American sports. Like, why would we ever think it would be different? Like, but I still think of that era fondly. I don't beat ourselves up for like having that hope. I think it was very sweet to think that we could change the world that way. But I think to that point as well, though, that like the league has grown as well. Something we've talked about a little bit more explicitly is just the pure amount of teams increasing, I think, has diluted the situation. It also made, I think, following the league a little bit harder to do. We've bemoaned the fact that it's much harder to do a show these days like MLS Extra Time was in like the 2016-ish period. It's not possible for one or two people to really watch every game this weekend. You can really tell that Doyle is being asked to do too much. We're also in a funny situation where Andrew Wiebe is like also the other last man standing, and is being asked to do similar stuff, I think, at MLS that like a team of like 4 people were doing before. Like, I don't know why we're in a situation where Andrew Wiebe is now the one who's going to the like different supporters clubs and trying to do like segments on like a slice of life for them.
Especially when it's supposedly now on Apple and under bigger budget with more resources, and it feels like a much smaller universe than it ever has.
Why aren't they sending like Ben Stiller or Adam Scott or whatever to go?
Yeah, just Severance, but
just MLS.
Yeah, and yeah, like literally they had like Kalen Carr and Rachel Bonnetta doing that 10 years ago, but now like Andrew Wiebe's the only guy who has to do all of it. It's not what he's good at. It's not what he's supposed to be doing. But this I guess if I have to entertain counterfactuals for like what could have actually been different for American soccer culture, I have to say that like I think in general it is naive to think that soccer would have changed American sports more than vice versa. But one thing that I think could have been different is that it was an unforced error by the league to really shut down its like own media operation. Because the way that I understood at the time is that the league was paying the owners were all putting in money and taking a loss on standing up MLS Digital to cover itself and sort of seed interest in the league, while there was no market for it. Which is like absolutely what you should do if your group of owners is like making this bet on trying to seed the sport's popularity in general. And I don't know if at some point they just thought that they no longer needed it, or if there was some sort of external shock that like they felt they could no longer commit this money to it. They decided to pull back. And I think the league has really suffered from it.
Pulled back, and I was told explicitly during a tiff with certain MLS digital journalists a few years ago that they were just going for clicks eventually, which meant they were covering, random USMNT guys in Europe. They were covering, the national team itself. And there were moments where I, amongst other people, pointed out that you'd look at the front page of the league site and, like, on a night when there were actual league games going on, and the scores would be, like, tiny little print in the corner while there's 8 million stories about Pulisic and Greg Berhalter and all this stuff. And when, someone like me calls it out, they were like, oh, what do you want us to do? We're trying to get clicks. And it's like, is that really what the site is for?
Well,
right.
Is that really what the league's resources are
Well,
for?
I think part of this is also, like, what you're talking about is just part of the overall. We exist in context, right? We didn't just fall from a coconut tree.
But we don't do that anymore. Okay.
But like I think this is a symptom of, like, the failure of the pivot to video stuff that happened on social media, and there was a lot of investment into, like, video production for all companies at the time, and then once that came out of trend, that became an expense that you have to shed off to become a sustainable company now, and then, like, all the trends of, like, and this is something that the league has always done, right? Follow these kind of, like, overall investor trends.
Yes, but no, because my response to that is that I feel like the league actually bucked the first wave of that, because it felt to me at the time, I should clarify again, I don't have any inside on this, but just from an outside perspective, to me it felt like the league was insulated from that at first, because at some point it understood itself as putting out a loss leader on its media operation to have, like, this longer term project of building up the prestige of the league.
Right.
And then at some point somebody decided, what the hell, we're supposed to actually literally be making money on this. Where it's like, no, you weren't supposed to be making money on extra time radio. Like, you were supposed to be cultivating your fan. And I feel like it was working too. Now, the counterpart to this is that, like, there are lots of people who are just going to MLS games now. I'm sure that the sheer count of people, of butts and seats, as they used to say, is higher than it was before. I do think that I don't think it was necessary to gut the media operation for that to happen. I do think there is, like, sort of a missing there now, that the league, it was really a unforced error on their part.
Well, and this was a point, I don't know if you made this on the show or just in conversation, but it was a good point you made a while ago where, there was something where somebody, like, in the media landscape, the MLS media landscape, small as it is now, going, like, how am I supposed to get, a credential for so-and-so, if I'm at, my own blog, there's no other place for me to work. And it's kind of like, having an expansive MLS digital and some of the appendages of that did serve as kind of an intermediate space for writers and, God forbid, content creators, whoever, to get their name out there and, get themselves in the mix and get some reps and experience with doing broader, media stuff and building out the media scene around the league. And that's just gone the last few years. I mean, certainly with me personally, SB Nation cutting its MLS sites, obviously wasn't the league itself, but definitely a watershed moment in all of this kind of congealing and leaving the scene pretty empty.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely point on. And I think bringing it back to
like, Apple's not providing that kind of thing.
No.
Like you just said, I mean, they're stretching Weeby onto every possible screen. They're barely producing anything during the week except, like, a Zoom interview show.
Yeah.
And
they're not even doing, like, the high level stuff. Like,
and they're just, like, they're just completely boring interviews with players.
Right.
There's no actual, like, media discourse, fan discourse, the kind of thing that builds kind of characters and narratives around the league. It's just kind of like, let's listen to this, Dutch U21 player who showed up 6 months ago and ask him the same 5 questions about how he likes MLS, and he responds in broken English, and it's just not very compelling stuff.
And I think one point that illustrates this as well is that there are some things that Apple and MLS have done that, like, on paper, I look at them and I say, I should like this. I should like the fact that the main personalities are BWP Dax and Sasha Klestra.
Right.
I should like the fact that like the team started a podcast. Is it still going on? I don't know. And like BWP, and even though we never really particularly cared for Connor Lade, but like we should like the fact that like they brought in some veterans to like try to institutionalize some club memory. It's not really hitting, and I think it's because of this lost emphasis on like the slow build of like the devoted fan base culture. Because I think the other missing piece, to bring it back a little bit more, is that I think you really have to remember like soccer's convergence or like coexistence with like this early 20 teens movement of like really people moving back into cities, and like, for lack of a better term, you just like hipsterdom, as the haters would call it, that like was a huge part of like a certain rebirth of MLS. I mean, it's worth repeating that, you know, the general periodization that people give of MLS 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, is that 1.0 is like the initial attempt to be like fully family oriented, changing the rules to be more like high school soccer, like high school sports, pivot away from that because that didn't work. And then 2.0, I mean, it gets fuzzy, but like I think one real inflection point, of course, is bringing in the league, moving away from that model and bringing in like Toronto and then the Cascadia teams, which really lean into the like sort of urban, younger fan base who are
building
like,
stadiums in cities.
Yeah, doing a little bit more of the cosplay of European fandom. Speaking to what I was saying earlier, and that was a real part of like it was. People coming, and Cork, you've made this comparison before of like how like the original Northwest England clubs were like really formed of like people coming in from the countryside to and working in the mills or working at the docks and like needing a new sort of identity to glom onto. This was sort of serving that function for like this urban young cohort, and I think there was a version of that in New York as well. And I think part of the reason we were so on alert about NYCFC coming in is that NYCFC came in and was the most explicit project that was trying to cater to that whole shtick so far. And one, we found it like too on the nose, that it was obnoxious, and two, it was like going to totally cannibalize Rebel New York and take away like the interesting parts of some of the more interesting parts of RBNY culture. And I think it's worth just like sort of reflecting on like what it was like to go to a Red Bulls game, like when we started doing this podcast, and how different I think the vibe is, for better or for worse. Because if you went to a game in like 2013, 2014, you were taking the path to a much more barren sort of Red Bull arena.
Yeah.
The
warehouses were still up.
Although that persisted for quite some time.
Yeah, but that's like, to me, that was a big like, oh, this is like an indicator of like the type of space I'm going to.
But you went to this stadium off of like the weird other mass transit system in New York, and you walked in and it was like this strikingly kind of austere building where it was like Rebel Arena was mostly concrete.
But also like, why is it so nice?
Like very nice, but like also austere, and then very like toned down. Like it was Red Bull, like when they came in, like I think they just came and plopped in a stadium and kind of just copy pasted like the European conventions of soccer, and the whole experience felt very like different than going to an American sports game, which I think really fed into this sort of like, hipster adjacency that I'm talking about. But then it was this kind of thing where
the supporters groups, because there was less going on, also was more important.
Yes.
Part of the experience.
But then you could also, alternatively, go on the PATH train, walk a little bit, walk into a restaurant in Newark where like they only speak Portuguese and kind of speak Spanish, which is kind of true, and then go and walk into this like really stripped down, different kind of sports atmosphere, and casually Thierry Henry is playing on the field. It was like this bizarre, cool confluence that, I don't know, to me at the time it made the world, like it made the city and it made the world seem like very big in an exciting way, that there was this weird confluence of all these factors here, and that you had found something kind of like not cool, but like you're just like at this weird confluence again. And this is very different from how I feel about going to games now.
I think the original ESC bar was also very cool. When
Yeah.
we were going.
What was it called again?
El Pastor.
Pastor.
Yeah. Yep.
We went there like right as it was closing.
Last time. Yeah.
Well, I think, this is honestly going back to even when I was like, a teenager in South Carolina when I started following the club more or less, where it's like something about just the general kind of specter of the club, kind of especially after the Red Bull switch and the ownership change and the logo change. There was something about it that felt kind of the way Brit was just laying out, like a very like unique and weird and like kind of nonsensical, honestly, but in a way that was fitting with the character of New York, and it felt like a New York thing. It felt like seeing like, I don't know, like the Sonic Youth washing machine logo or something. It was like this kind of off-kilter thing that was still something that could only really happen in New York.
Yeah.
And now, to borrow a metaphor that we were using, or an analogy we were using a lot during the later episodes of the show before we left off, was now it just feels like Seton Hall basketball.
Yeah.
Like, just something that's just kind of existing because there's still a little bit of money behind it, and they're just doing the bare minimum, kind of like going through the motions of being a small-time sports team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's like we've droned on and on about this, but the more you add to the presentation of the match day experience, the more the less importance the actual match takes on,
There was it takes away from the ritual sort of going in week in and week out, and like having that sort of stripped down experience. Although it's worth commenting as well, back to what we initially started this talking about, baseball, that this is to some extent a cross sports phenomenon. Lord knows the Mets put way too much shit going on in the stadium, even when they have 81 games a year. It's like crazy. This is a cross sports problem, but I think it really has affected MLS particularly. And I think it's worth acknowledging that like this probably was not a permanent state of, or a sustainable like state for the league to be in permanently. Something had to change. I mean, could you argue that this was a zero interest rate phenomenon? Maybe. Like, like Red Bull was not always going to be paying like Thierry Henry and Rafa Marquez and like this new stadium to like stand this up.
Kind of like in
but
tandem.
It could have been different.
Kind of like in tandem with what we were just saying about MLS Digital, where it was like somebody just decided overnight that they couldn't lose money on this anymore. I mean, it's kind of like where something changed with, and it seems like you see a lot of this across MLS, but certainly from our front row view for RBNY, it became obvious that at some point they just said, okay, you have to follow the trade magazine, instructions to a T. We don't really have the resources for anything else. Mm-hmm. And we don't really have, kind of the manpower, brain power of like having people steeped in MLS and working in MLS offices for years and years. I mean, it's kind of kids who are just getting their first job in sports after, getting out of their sports management degree, and just kind of, MLS is the best gig they can get. It's not necessarily because they're into the league.
That's a good shout, because I think that was another element of...
Especially in a place like New York, where it's expensive to live. It's hard to attract and keep kind of institutional talent and know-how like that.
Yeah, I think that was another factor you could kind of feel around soccer, and in New York in particular, like 2014-15-ish, is that the Red Bulls were, again, not cool. Like the branding was a little like off. Like everyone really, one way or another thought that it was a little strange that we were called the New York Red Bulls. But there was still this element where you could feel RBNY was like the center of gravity for soccer in New York City.
Right.
And people who, I think it seemed more common that like if you wanted to work in soccer, like do this kind of like more cool version of working in sports, you would work for Red Bull New York. Now, of course, there's NYCFC, there's a league office, but also like, half the random Champions League teams in Europe have like a New York office to like set up watch parties for like the Topeka Schalke fan club,
Right.
like, and some of the people that are inevitably probably getting poached to work on those kind of projects as well.
And I don't know if it's just like a thing where it's like, oh, we don't have as much budget or anything or as much money as we did before. It's arguably like they have too much now and they have to spend it every year. And
They
then
can't take risks with it.
Right, or they have to like, oh, we're gonna do all the things so that we have to ensure that we have the budget again next year because
Right.
we used it, or whatever, some kind of corporate slop like that. But it like to avoid that, you just need thought leadership of some kind to drive something unique. But instead of that, we've just got in kind of all of the templated cookie cutter like experiences that not only like. And I think one of the reasons we feel this so strongly when we go to a soccer game of all the extra presentation or like the extra packages that they bought or the things is because, like in these other sports, there are natural stoppages where you have to fill time and fill like gaps. But soccer, like the tension is inherent in the fact that anything can happen like within any moment, right?
Well,
Like,
especially, it's, maybe this is happening in the rest of MLS. It wouldn't surprise me, but just within our sphere, and just the way things have changed about the presentation of the Red Bulls, where it's like there are times where some of the club staff, like either on social media or in interviews or what have you, they'll kind of they probably don't even think they're letting the mask slip, but they'll straight up say things like we are building core memories, or like we are seeking to raise consumer assurance and like shit like that with what we're doing with the team. It's like you're not supposed to like literally show
JD Power and
puppet strings
Associates
moving.
best stadium experience.
Yeah,
2024.
which if that doesn't speak to how they're just following these just kind of sports business templates, I don't know.
It's like Don Draper going up and writing on the ad saying like, theirs are toxic, yours are toasted. It's like, no, you're not supposed to put that on the ad. You're supposed to you say that in the boardroom to everyone behind the scenes.
Right.
But I think this is a good point. And I think this brings us to the next sort of point in this periodization we're doing, which I do think, that brings us also to the question of what we try to do with this podcast. And one thing that I tried to inject every once in a while was doing a sort of periodization and doing an analysis and trying to contextualize different periods and try to like different patterns together. Now, is this periodization objective? No, it's intentionally subjective. But I think part of us sitting down to try to do this podcast was to give a little bit of more of that color commentary that we felt was not being given by like the more straight news approach of seeing red. And I think I think we see this reflected with the Red Bulls itself, where I think we've been describing a lot of this like initial period of the Red Bull Arena era of like this Henri and like initial couple years of Red Bull Arena as being this one sort of feeling. And I think the next period, is what I think is the most contingent period of club history. And it also overlaps with when we started the podcast, which is like the Jesse Marsh era, so to speak, of like 2015. And I would even extend that to 2019, where we get this departure from Red Bull spending money on Thierry Henry, Tim Cahill, Rafa Marquez, and we get this pivot to
Ralph Ball.
Yeah. And Mike Petke, R.I.P.
Why did we fire him?
Yeah, that feels like a million years ago now. To Jesse Marsh and this kind of new era of team under Dax McCarty, Sasha Kleshin, Jesse Marsh himself, and then BWP is sort of like the connecting link, I guess, a little bit, but he really comes in to his prime there. And then I think this of course becomes there that's really built off of the high press and all of that, but even more broadly speaking, I think it speaks to a strategy and a perception of the club as like no longer spending the most money per se and just like brute forcing things, but the theory and the hope was that they had really like figured out how to run things well and smartly by like having this paradigm breaking tactical system, at least for MLS, and maximizing their resources and taking advantage of the structural advantage of how many strong youth players were in the region. And that really, I think, pivoted into trying to be like Red Bull New York is a uniquely cutting edge organization that has this sort of quirky, like weird identity of like this
extremist philosophy of
Yeah.
soccer. Yeah, I think part of it though too. I'm looking at this in retrospect. Is that like we were talking about before, how MLS were made up of a bunch of like stars and like MLS guys. We eventually just had a team of just MLS guys.
Oh,
at that
yeah.
period.
Yeah.
It was like all MLS, like Sasha Kleshin, Mike Grella, Sal Zizzo, like all these guys were like the MLS guys,
right.
And
but
like,
that felt like a triumph in a way.
Yeah.
I guess
like a even level of all MLS guys.
It was a shift to have a squad that felt like a solid composition of MLS level guys, as opposed to the previous era where you would have like Thierry Henry and Chris Duval, who was like fresh out of college making $37,000,
Right.
like and like was clearly on a vastly different level. Even just to have guys that were a little bit like all kind of same-ish level on the field and not have to trade one of them immediately was definitely a shift. And I was going to say something else, but I've lost it. But I do think that it's funny thinking about this period as well, because I think there were obviously a lot of good vibes around the club at this period. It's when we were, I think, the most excited doing this podcast. 2018 in particular is really the big peak. But I do think, especially thinking about the club in contrast to NYCFC at this time, there was like this, I think like the optimistic case for being a Red Bulls fan was sort of this inherently unstable sort of premise that like the Red Bulls represented this sort of postmodern conflagration of things that was kind of funny and cool, because like NYCFC was lame because like they're trying to like cosplay being like a community club when they're like, you know, this Emirati backed like lame
And trying to force
AstroTurf thing.
Pirlo and Lampard
Yeah.
and shit and falling on their face for the most part.
And they're doing this thing again where they're like making the subtext the text and being like, oh, like they're trying to do like the
five boroughs.
they're trying to do the Bloomberg like New York City as luxury product thing, like it as like their like whole shtick. And it was like, no, what if the real cool thing was like this weird little team that has like a weird concentration of players, has this weird sponsorship
on this
brand,
weird train line.
Bad
this
branding.
weird train line, and the star players are Ian Wright's son and Timothy Chalamet's like childhood friend, you know, like, who's like maybe really good, but also maybe really bad. No one's really sure. Like, you know, it was
It was
controversial.
It was such a more rich text and a coherent one during those years, which makes it all the more weird that it's like.
Will we ever have an Alex Muil player again? Like,
Well, there was a lot of negativity back then, though, too, which is
Yeah.
easy to remember. Like, it was just like knee-jerk kind of thing in the fan base was to be like, oh, well, you know, maybe they would win in the playoffs if they actually signed good players instead of these scrubs. And it's like, I swear, you know, without, like, you know, being nitty-gritty about it, I mean, I think a lot of those same voices are the ones now that the teams finishing like 9th every year, they're like, yeah, well, you know, that's just how it is. Like, you know, it's still fun, isn't it? Like, you know, don't you support the team? And it's like so incoherent to me, just that when the team was successful doing it in this pretty counterintuitive and kind of interesting way, that was considered lesser than whatever this mess they have now, where people are, you know, going apeshit over Cade Cowell. Like, that's supposed to be a thing that's exciting within the context of club history.
I want to get into that more, but I also want to mention briefly too that there was a very exciting period or compelling period where you had like, it felt like a very coherent top tier of the league that we were in, and it felt like there was a nice stylistic contrast between all of them, where we were like the pressing team, NYCFC were trying to like do a possession Guardiola impersonation with Patrick Vieira being brought in to run that. Felt very like out of central casting. Then
Seattle was the conventional, like, domestic-based team. Like
Toronto was like a DP team that wasn't trying to do as much tiki-taka. And then you shift to Atlanta kind of being like the new thing where we should put a pin in this because it can be its own conversation. But like they self-consciously from the get-go were like, oh, we're paving the new way of MLS 3.0 where like we're bringing in high dollar transfers to then flip, which I think sets us down the bad path.
right.
But I mean, to what you're saying as well, Cork, I do kind of want to take advantage of this being sort of a sign-off episode to be peek a little bit under the curtain than we usually did over the show, where I do think this marks a point of departure as well in like editorial voices between like us and Seeing Red and other voices in the fan base that we didn't really explicitly, I think, comment on at the time, which is like, as you mentioned, I think that the club really did sort of inherit this or had this MetroStars curse of curricula, Oso Metro. What's
That's
so Metro.
I'm
We've
like
gone
really
beyond.
trying to. I'm like not once a Metro.
You've so internalized it doesn't exist.
I know, right? I'm just really trying to. Yeah, that's so Metro mindset, which I think like in the spirit of magnanimity as well. I think while we're talking about eras, the peak sort of that's so Metro moment, I think you could point to is maybe 2012 in that playoff run where you have the weird playoff rescheduling because of the hurricane and the snow and then the reversed calls on the penalties and yada yada. But then you have this sort of like, oh, woe is me culture about the club where like the Red Bulls and Metro are just like a bunch of bums who can never get across the line or they're cursed. And then we hit what I call the contingent period, which is the Marsh era, where like the team actually becomes quite good. They win the Supporters' Shield for the second time. When the team won the Supporters' Shield in 2013, it was widely kind of seen as breaking the curse. They didn't end up winning the cup that season, but then like as time goes on, you kind of get this creeping disappointment still, and feeling like the curse or like was still kind of in place, and that winning the Shield wasn't enough. And I think this is where you start getting like kind of we start developing a different voice along with some of our friends compared to Seeing Red, which I think is a little bit of a divergence in the fan media, where the RBNY media before that, like in RBNY core and RBNY Twitter era, was sort of a monoculture of perspectives on the team. Now you had kind of us and Metro Fan TV, I think, really arguing that like, oh, like the Red Bulls are like actually really good, and
previous versions of Once a Metro.
Yeah. I think Seeing Red was a little bit more on the like, I'll believe it when I see it, like they're cursed, like
Attendance isn't good enough.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah, attendance really has fallen off as a subject of debate. But
It's not even like it's good now.
no, I mean we could fit that into the larger discussion of
Right.
like soccer making in America. And then, but I think this really does kind of like inform kind of it was really kind of the well, I don't want to make it sound bigger than it was because it's like none of it really mattered. But I think it was really like an existential question about like how you conceived of the club. Is like, are they this cursed franchise that can never do anything right?
That has to get more famous than it is. That has to become, or it has to become mass culture, or what has now in this decade become slop culture.
Yeah.
Whereas, like we've kind of laid out through most of this episode so far, we were pretty, I don't know, cool with how things were in those years, particularly the team, being more competitive over the season as a whole, as opposed to these supposed Hollywood moments they were supposed to have.
Right.
It was described as the positivity brigade.
That's right. We were described
That's
as
right.
part of the positivity brigade.
Yes.
I forgot. I
God
was part
forbid
of
you be
something.
positive when the team wins
Doing well.
3 league titles in a decade.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, well, I've been referring to this as like the most contingent part of club history, is that it turned out that the Emperor had no clothes in a lot of ways. Jesse Marsch leaves halfway through the season. We make it over the line to win the Supporters Shield in 2018. 2018 still remains like one of the most exhilarating seasons of a sport that I've ever followed.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think like that playoff run as well, like just beating Columbus felt like a very solid, coherent step in like getting a demon off of our back. And then you had the showdown with Atlanta. Even though it ends tragically, it also kind of felt like this really like narratively coherent clash
it
as
didn't
well.
feel anticlimactic. Yeah.
No.
And even before that,
Until the next season.
we had CONCACAF too.
Yes.
That was like the big
That was a big
fucking
round.
deal
Wow, remember
moment.
Champions League?
Yeah.
Yes. Like
Remember when there
beating
was just one Champions League?
Right.
beating Tijuana. Like
Yeah.
that was wild.
Making it to the final
yeah.
against Chivas, and then like also that speaks to like the project, like the project of American soccer as well, because it was like us and Toronto were the last two guys standing, and there was this sense that like, well, obviously we want one of them to win.
Yeah.
And it felt really important to be the first team to get there. Neither Toronto nor us got there.
And then Seattle like kind of did it.
And then like no one cares, you know. It's like it's like, oh, and the dog has caught the car
Right.
yet again.
Weren't they like also very bad that year too?
I
Yeah,
think they
which
kind of
didn't
were.
help.
And then
Yeah.
part of it also was that Puma, like the way that Mexico handled their qualification was always really frustrating, where like two of the teams were like the league winners from like solidly like a year and a half
Yeah.
before. So like when Pumas were playing in that tournament, they were like not very good anymore, and then Seattle beat them, and it kind of made it feel cheap too.
And then they made even more competitions like that are even
Well,
more disorienting.
That's what I was going
And
to get
make
to
the
too.
and make the seeding and where you are in the standings even more difficult to parse.
Yeah,
The
but
level
pour
of
one
it-
out for the group stages in the Champions League as well as
Yeah.
early stage U.S. Open Cup matches, where again that felt like another case where you would go and the attendance would not be good. And
2,000 people.
You would be like, obviously I knew they weren't making money on it or whatever. But you would watch. You know, when you watch Champions League in Europe at the time, they also had weird, funny games like that, or like the third round of the FA Cup. It's like, oh, they might go play a weird, tiny club, but you would go and you would watch your team play a team from Guatemala or Grenada or whatever, and it would make the world feel like this very interesting big place that had all these funny little things that you could go. And you're like, oh, obviously this game isn't money, but making the team money, but like building this project and like going through the exercise of this is still like a money-making enterprise ultimately for the team. But then, you know, the flip switched at some point. They're like, we have to make money on every single thing, you know?
Right, and there's kind of like a bit of a big fish in a small pool feeling of like traveling to a Caribbean stadium for like those games, or like, hey, we're doing them like a little bit of like being the big team of visiting when you're going to.
I think it was also
Like
just genuinely interesting cultural exchange.
Yeah.
Like, you know, remember that? Remember?
And to Cork's point too, right now, it's just like there's so many like illegitimate types of competition that seem to have come up out of the sake of like creating value for.
It wasn't that long ago that like even beyond the Shield or the playoff seedings or whatever, you knew kind of based on where you were in the standings. I think it was more or less top four for most years, where it was like, okay, you're qualifying for Champions League
Right.
next year. That's a real thing that you can seize on. That's doesn't mean that you have to go all the way and win a trophy,
Right.
but it provides different little kind of motivations and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And it feels like that's both gotten more complicated and feels like less of a factor in the background of
The
things.
2-2-2 format of playoffs, what was the old NFL format, was the best one, because the top two got a bye, the next two got home field advantage, and the next two were the last two in. Each of them had stakes. It made each tier feel valuable, and it made it also so that it was hard to qualify for playoffs, and there were
Yeah.
only 6 teams. One thing that we haven't mentioned yet in this entire episode is that also this is the first season that the Red Bulls missed the playoffs in forever, and this is not even really factoring at all into our disillusionment with like not keeping up with this, because it is the fact that I think that is more damaging that we've commented on before is not that they missed the playoffs, but the last like 2, if not 3 seasons, the club has spent like 4 or 5 months playing really poorly, but like not even being in danger of being eliminated yet,
Yeah.
you know? And it made every week feel pointless if they could just lose all of these games and still be in 9th place and then make it to MLS Cup. And it's like, why am I devoting my time to this? And the question that club has to, that the answer that the club is offering is that the reason you're devoting your time to this is because we bought all of these Marvel characters to come to the game, and you need to buy a glup shitto popsicle for your kid to form core memories, not that this is a project worth following.
It's even crazier that it's like, yeah, we had one fluke season where we made the cup final. Didn't even make us into Champions League.
Yeah.
Didn't even, I don't know what it got us into.
No.
It's completely incoherent. They fucking changed the rules for Miami half the time, like 30 seconds before they announce it. You know, I don't know how anybody can feel like they know what they're looking at when they watch an MLS game anymore.
I don't think it's an accident that my favorite part of watching MLS was the period between the league finally deciding that, okay, we're going with Champions League instead of Superliga. Because I think there was a period where people were genuinely unsure if maybe Superliga would be like a better model. And then the period where they say, oh, we're adding Leagues Cup back in to have more games. And I think that period of coherence, and again, similar to like MLS media, I think if they had stuck with it, they could have slowly built up the prestige of the Champions League. I'm like kind of sympathetic to the idea that maybe sometimes you just need like to relaunch things.
I feel like there was also like
stuck
the way
with
that they fucked up the U.S. Open Cup too. Not to give credit to people who care too much about the U.S. Open Cup, but like I think part of it's like, oh yeah, this is kind of like a cool shared tradition we have with all the other football.
It's a ritual.
Like,
it's a ritual instead of something that's constantly being engineered to be
like
as
better and catchier, and
efficient and appealing as possible. That just ends up overcomplicating everything. I mean, this is a broader quote about soccer as a whole, because soccer as a whole has not been immune to a lot of this stuff, a lot of these trends we've been talking about with MLS. But and I'm probably not going to say it perfectly, but Jonathan Wilson, the English writer, had a really good quote in one of his columns a few months ago, where it was kind of a general column bemoaning some of what's going on with the game, like kind of structure-wise, and saying that the fans have more or less spoken, or at least, kind of thoughtful fans have spoken, that the game's gotten way too complicated and disorienting, and the powers that be, have responded by making things even more complicated, which, has made everybody kind of unhappy.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's things as simple as, like, VAR being introduced during our time, and, like, the stunted celebrations of, like, a VAR goal is, like, not immaterial to the enjoyment of our overall.
That's one microcosm of the whole thing, for sure.
If it were just that, we could have survived it. But yeah, bringing us back to this march through club and podcast history, though, I dare I bring this back to memory. This is a very contentious period, I think, in podcast history. But the Armis era, Varick. I got very animated in this era. I was very upset because we were in the process of discovering that the Emperor had no clothes, and that Red Bull as an organization really was not this finely tuned thing that had figured out soccer and solved it, contrary to the global hegemony of tiki-taka. But rather, it really kind of was all Jesse Marsh, just like manically holding everything together. And Tyler Adams, us getting like the best 12 months out of Tyler Adams' entire career.
The human touch matters.
Yeah.
As Red Bull is so stubborn to learn.
But then discourse-wise, it was interesting because then once it was revealed that our theory, and I will also disclaim that this is all still before Cork joined in the summer of 2019. So a lot of the boosterism of like Jesse Marsh and Red Bull figuring out, I will take responsibility for that and note that Cork was not contributing to the editorial line of the podcast.
You can't blame us for thinking that way when EDSS was still airing.
I don't think it had. Let's come back to that. But anyway, we were proven wrong that Red Bull actually had no idea what they were doing, and they were just like really cashing in on Jesse Marsh being really talented at this level, at least. But then the reaction wasn't that like, these guys are idiots and like their whole thesis about the club was wrong. The reaction became this whole thing, like the debate around Chris Armis, and like as Cork mentioned earlier about the club right now, the discourse lines around the club adopted a position of like, are you dissatisfied with Chris Armish for failing the revolution, and leading us and not leading the Red Army successfully, or is Chris Armish like a true son of the club in that he's like a local guy who's just trying his best, and like this is really what Red Bull New York, this is really Metro's true level, is being kind of like a shitty club, and we're actually more comfortable with that. And that really the problem is that the club doesn't spend money on DPs. And that became the discourse that also got very heated. Eventually I made, I think, my Once a Metro debut by writing my case for firing Armis as a piece there. But this also, this is now 2019, the season after the Shield win, also becomes my one of my favorite periods in podcast history, because that's when I think Energy Drink Soccer Show started, and I think we also started listening to Athletico Mints, Bob Mortimer's podcast. Started interjecting a little bit more surreal elements to the show, which I thought was a nice, fun period that lasted through COVID that I think pretty fondly on, but I think had an expiration date that we heated ultimately.
That unfortunately the club was not good enough on the other end of.
Yeah, exactly. I think it kind of did require a little bit of quality on the field.
Because things really did just kind of stall from there.
Yeah.
More or less.
I mean, the zone framing really.
The zone.
That's where it came.
That's true. The zone. I think it's safe to say that we used to ask every week, like, are we out of the zone?
We should still ask that.
We live in the zone now.
Exactly.
And so
everything
many parts
has become
of
the zone.
Yeah.
Everything is the black box.
It's too late to get into it now, but like another person that I'm shocked hasn't been mentioned so far is Jurgen Klinsmann, just as a part of a dismantling, disorganizing force
That's where it came
on
from.
American soccer.
That just discombobulated everything about how anybody is supposed to think about soccer in this country.
And now we have Klinsmann too.
One of my questions later in the podcast, one of my superlatives that I've nominated that we nominate is pieces or like bits or articles that I regret not writing. And one of them is that I feel like at one point we had a very punchy picture of like how we thought of like the Klinsmann zone and then adapted it to the Armis zone. And now I can remember the Armis zone part, but the Klinsmann like original text, I really struggle to remember, and I wish I had written it down. Maybe we put it on a podcast way back when, but that would have been a nice thing.
No, it's okay.
Have
We've made the original text the Armis zone now, much like how we are the inventors of Kiki and Booba.
Right. Yeah, that's right. But then Chris Armis, of course, has a happy ending. Anyway, kind of. Actually, Chris Armis did. Well, in some ways it's like the movie Boogie Nights. Like the second act did get kind of dicey there. Like the post-firing, it was like some the vibes weren't good. But then in the third act, he's like
back home
managing fucking Cristiano Ronaldo at Old Trafford, and he's like giving him directions. And at that point, I was like, good for him. I'm glad it worked out because. Lord knows it didn't really end up mattering for Red Bull otherwise. But then, it behooves us to mention COVID. Of course, COVID was, I think, a big reset. And I think I was, upon coming back from COVID, I think one of the first or second times I was at the stadium, I didn't want to... I think accept it quite then, but I think I did have like a creeping sense of like, things for this club are not going to be the same. Like I can tell that like people have left and are not going to come back. Mm-hmm. And I think I was fighting that. I was in denial about that for a couple of seasons.
I was much too pre-focused on making sure I felt like things could go back to normal at the time, I feel like. And that was part of the ritual. It was like, oh, we're going back to games. So maybe in my head, I put up a little barrier. It was like, oh, yeah, things can still be like the good old days.
And then I think the club never really gets good again there was a brief window under Struber
Yeah.
where, again, it's crazy to remember that Struber's first season was technically in 2020 when he managed the playoff game and the playoff game alone. But there was that brief period under Struber where we had Klimala and Fabio. Fabio, fascinating character that I really have forgotten.
Wow.
And we had Frankie Amaya, I think, or maybe we didn't have him yet. Anyway, we're running the diamond formation, and it was like going pretty well. And then we had that really exciting game where we beat Toronto when Armis was managing Toronto, and we really dominated them. And like that actually felt that's maybe the last time there was a result. A Red Bulls result that felt really like plugged into like league discourse for me now that I think about it.
And then just felt like something coherent. I mean, that year I think they finished 8th or whatever, and it was kind of like a rush to get in the playoffs at the end under the first Struber year. But at the end of that season, there was the playoff loss in Philly. But it felt like, okay, that was the first step of something that seems a bit substantial.
Right.
And then...
Before even getting to that, though, like that Toronto game in particular, though, that there was like still Armis discourse was like hanging on a little bit, where like the league media was like, "Oh, Armis was like failed by not getting TPs," and then
he goes to the most star-studded team in the league.
Us and our friends were like, "No, he's actually just sucks. Sorry." And then Struber comes out and rolls out the ball with like randos like Fabio and Klimala, as much as we liked both of them in their own ways, and just like totally pantses them. And like that was the last time I felt like I was plugged into like a league-wide narrative, and like that MLS media like was like shaping how I felt about the team. Now thinking about it, but yes, also like later that season. We have the moment where like Struber just like we had an injury or two or like a lackluster result, and he decides, oh, I can't work with these people, and doesn't.
That was the next year.
That was the next year. Okay.
Which after Thelwell left, and Struber spent the whole preseason saying, oh, this squad sucks, don't expect anything. Then they had a great first half of the season, and somehow all of a sudden he, like you said, kind of started explicitly saying at some points like, We're not as good as you think. Like, please don't think we're good. I'm gonna prove to you we're not good. And then, the rest is history.
Finally did it. And then I think like thinking back on the club culture at this time too, I do think like post-COVID, the club kind of tried to pick up where they had left off before by being like, because like the club culture to that point was like excellence.
Well, and this is kind of getting to what had us a little bit pro-Struber in his early moments was that he seemed like a vessel, and Thelwell being brought in before him felt like a vessel of like, oh, Ragnick or whoever, the Red Bull office that is still a coherent top-of-the-line football operation, they are actually getting hands-on with New York. They're installing their most like kind of schematic Red Bull personnel to do, an even better version of the Jesse Marsh thing. And, and this became a little bit mixed in with just Red Bull as an ownership group, as in a football operation kind of falling apart. But, Struber, and Thelwell to some extent both ended up being kind of just there for a couple years at transition points in their careers and weren't all that invested in building New York. And to be honest, I'm not as over the moon as a lot of people seem to want to be. But to be honest, some of the early flashes of what we're seeing right now with Julian de Guzman and Michael Bradley is an example of like, oh, we actually do need to put people who are committed to MLS in place, people who are committed to this particular project, instead of just kind of using it as a little resume point. That human impact matters, and that leaves me maybe. I'm certainly not as interested as I was 5 years ago, but to the extent that I am, a little interested in what's being built there now, because it's kind of the polar opposite of what had us excited about the Thelwell-Struber era.
A couple of things here where, jumping forward now in the spirit of periodization, it does finally feel like we are entering a new era of sorts. I think like part of the alienation of like the last year or two that has taken us out of it is that it felt like, where are we going? It just feels like an endless slog.
I mean, to speak even more to why that feels like there's a little bit of a dead cat bounce with de Guzman and Bradley is that it seems clear by now that Schneider just didn't give a fuck.
Yeah.
And was probably barely even in the country at the time.
So Schneider succeeds Thelwell, kind of. Where like
Thelwell gets a better job.
we had but like didn't they? That was the thing where they overlapped, right? Where like Thelwell was brought in and Schneider was brought in, like with the higher.
Schneider was brought in. No, Thelwell was brought in with the head of sport title because Hamlet was still there.
Hamlet, of course.
And then Thelwell
Dennis
left.
Hamlet. He was the real problem, remember?
Yeah.
Right.
And then Thelwell left, and then
God.
even though it was supposedly a real position, head of sport was just kind of empty for 6-9 months.
Right.
And then
We assumed it was just like a.
Schneider was
Yeah.
thrown in there after his debacle at Schalke.
We thought it was a David Stearns maneuver.
Which
Yes.
Schneider had been already, just kind of like a general Red Bull soccer apparatchik, like,
Right.
not at the top of the food chain, not at the bottom, but just kind of one of the guys in the room. And it seems like
He was just
he
a
was
German.
supposedly put in charge of New York, but it seemed like he was just kind of fulfilling his general Red Bull network duties
Yeah.
while just being based in New York, more or less.
Yeah.
Didn't seem like he really learned much about MLS or was all that active with what the team was
No.
doing.
And Shores, who has been, I guess, has he been fired in the time since we last recorded?
Well, he hasn't been. Has he
Well,
been fired?
yeah.
I
or
mean,
has
we
he
haven't
not
recorded since
renewed?
the beginning of the season.
I'm
Right.
being like, honestly, I was like, did Shores even start this season? Yeah. But he went a long way with our patience by just not being as odious a figure as Gerhard Struber was. Or like the team played kind of okay under him sometimes, so then they got pretty bad. But then we didn't get as up in arms about it because we were like, well, at least this guy seems like a normal person.
It was like, there might have been ideas, but who cares if there were or not?
Well, he was
Like,
also-
Well, it
Yeah.
just didn't seem like there was any actual effort or
progression.
plan.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just kind of, all the way down to just handing out deals to like Forsberg and Choupo-Moting and Alexander Hawk. It was just kind of like, we're just kind of a bullpen of random players.
Just
and
like stumbling all the way.
nobody's really expecting anything to happen, so who cares?
Right. Especially like now that. Well, I mean, maybe I'm skipping ahead, but now that like Cornell is left for another MLS team, it feels like,
Yeah.
especially like.
Before I
no
think
project.
it's worth mentioning as well that for me, I'm as I've been reflecting in anticipation of this episode, there's a couple different like inflection points that come for me in my journey in my fandom. Like biggest win, I think, is that Columbus win, like that we were feeling. I think that Toronto game has come up to me about like last time I felt plugged into Team Discourse. But I think like what felt like a big move for me in feeling like a sort of chain of continuity felt broken is that when the team got rid of Frankie and Maya, that for me felt like that there was a break in like the team trying to field a competitive like and coherent vision of a squad. This is not to say that like Frankie and Maya is the best player ever, but like I think one thing that had been compelling to me as a fan was that I felt that there was this sort of run of midfielders and run of this team that went from hell, even Dwayne De Rosario to Dax McCarty to Sasha Kleshin to Kaku to Tyler Adams and then like CCJ even, and then went to Frankie and Maya ultimately as being like, this guy's going to be the sort of like a key linchpin in our midfield that like affects the way we play and is like sort of this above average guy. He's not the star of the show. Kaku was, but like he's not like the Thierry Henry player, but he's really like the metronome that's going to help us make us work and like a keystone for the squad. And then they
kind
traded
of what I was
him.
expecting from Drew Yearwood when he was playing.
Yeah, and then they traded him away just like for no one, and then like they kind of just passed the ball around the edge of the field for a little bit, and I was like, oh, to me that was a big inflection point where I was like, I feel less attached to this this chain of players that are all feel together. It feels like there was a rupture, which I think also speaks, bringing it back to this like point about club culture as well. I do feel like post-COVID there was a brief moment where the team was trying to like continue the theme of like, oh, Red Bull New York is like the club culture is excellent, but then the team was not good. They can no longer do that anymore. They couldn't have the season campaign be like our fortress when we were losing a majority of games at home. And then it brings us to the point that we've talked about a lot, where there seems to have almost been like this, conscious or not, like total like rebirth of the team, and that people talk about the team, the club talks about itself almost like it's a expansion club that started in like 2022.
Yeah.
Where part of me, if I'm feeling generous, I understand the need to pivot a little bit. Where like post-COVID, things did kind of need to reset. You couldn't just like continue posting the way that, or talking about the club that we did in 2018 when we were just like running roughshod over everyone. But now it's like, it really feels like the club, it is Seton Hall basketball, like we've talked about before, like Toledo Rockets football, you know? And that is like just really taken me out of it, for sure. Although it's interesting, you know, my eyebrows have flicked upwards a little bit at this switch to de Guzman and Bradley, because this whole time I kind of assumed de Guzman was just like not really do anything, but now that Schneider's gone and de Guzman's actually making moves, I'm like, oh,
now we know what was happening.
Yeah. And then two, Michael Bradley like fits under the same category as like BWP and Sasha being on TV, where I'm like, this is something that like 2014 me would be really into. Like I would be really excited. Like Michael Bradley should be one of the like characters of American soccer,
right,
that if Jurgen Klinsmann hadn't, you know, destroyed the scene, like would be a more coherent, sort of compelling figure of the sport. And being a semi-local, it's fascinating that he's here. But right now, I don't really feel anything about it. I feel still kind of blasé about it.
Even the lineage for him to get here was like very like, oh, he took over like RB2 for a season, and then this is like, oh, we're just putting him in because he's convenient.
Well, but I mean, like the kind of what Brit's saying is that he is the kind of personality that does get that kind of red carpet when you do have kind of a coherent historical context and cultural context for the league. And, you know, those sorts of structures just feel so much less in place than they would have 5-10 years ago, when something like hiring Michael Bradley might have been more exciting.
A big deal, yeah.
Should we move, or are there any other chronologies we want to reflect on, or is it time to move to superlatives?
I think we covered all the important parts of RBNY history.
I think there's other things I have in my notes, but I think that they might come up a little bit more in this prompt rather than chronologically. I guess the one thing that we have not returned to since the very beginning of this recording is that NYCFC was such a big part, I think, of the energy starting out, and it is baffling to me that we are now in a position where, one, I'm not animated by this at all, really. Two, you know, when I see someone wearing like NYCFC stuff around the city, which is not often at all, like I no longer really get mad the way that I used to. I used to be like, ah, fuck that guy, like that's so lame. But now I'm like, well, if they like soccer and they live in New York City,
what other team are they going to wear?
Yeah, who
like,
else are you going to
like the Red Bulls are like aggressively ignoring them and like don't seem to want them to tune in. So like I can't really get mad at this person. Three, as we've commented on, they're building a stadium right now. It's actually happening. It's like midway construction.
I visited the site recently, and it's like happening.
But then like no one seems to care. It's weird. Like even among like MLS,
they won the cup.
No one really cared about that. That's like Seattle.
I think that was the death blow.
That was a big inflection point for me.
Yeah,
was just, you know, that was supposed to be the worst thing that could possibly happen.
Right.
Them winning the great MLS Cup before us. No one
one
cared.
Well, I mean,
they had a little zip tie sign that was all crooked in the stadium.
Yeah.
Still there.
Like, there wasn't a parade.
Them winning the cup with a pretty random squad of people too, also I think was not good for them.
In like a COVID year,
they won the cup against a Philly team that had like half their starting 11 out because they were on like quarantine.
Yeah.
So like none of it was real.
And also like it just the whole scene was so like it just feels so illegitimate now, like the cup.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
compared
just
to-
like no one is really keeping track of either the cups or the shields. I
But
think.
also, I feel like the cup thing happened to Atlanta too.
Right.
Right. It's like there's a cup like fatigue or like hangover that
The
happens
dog,
in like the
the
general
dog caught the
interest.
car.
Yeah.
Atlanta tried to like retool and be like, oh, we gotta, we're like the next big thing. Where like we're gonna bring in Barco and whoever else the other guy was, and we're gonna like sell them on. And it's like turns out, oh, one, playing slots at the casino all day is not always successful, and two, it's not very entertaining or compelling.
Yeah. And now the whole league is doing it.
Yeah.
But I think the MLS has gotten kind of lucky with some league-wide narrative things, and then has gotten unlucky with others. They got kind of lucky in a sense with that when Beckham coming on, and one, bringing more profile league was successful, but then two, him failing initially, or like the team failing around him, and then them eventually restructuring and getting to the mountaintop with the Galaxy was very compelling. That really like made it seem like something that people were watching MLS every year to be like, oh, is this the year where we get Beckham and Henry in the final? Like, finally. Henry obviously never made it, but Beckham's whole trajectory had it. But then unlucky moments is that you have Seattle and Portland vying for the title a little bit, and then Portland wins it first with kind of a random squad, and then Seattle wins it immediately after with also a kind of random squad, maybe less so than Seattle or Portland, but like in a year where they were like bad for the first half of the season and were not like billed as a top team. And then like another unlucky moment, I think, in a way, is that Seattle wins the Champions League, which was like the white whale for the league, in a way that we discussed, like no one cared about because Seattle weren't particularly good. It was COVID or like post-COVID, and Pumas were not good. And now no one cares about Champions League at all, and it doesn't even exist in the same format. NYCFC maybe the same sort of thing, where it's like they won with a kind of random squad of guys in a COVID-affected year, and no one likes them, so no one cares.
And just the way, combined all with, what we were just saying, where it's like the whole league has become obsessed with doing this, buy and sell transfer thing, and the squads are transient and incoherent. And it's just, I think we've used this framework on the show before in this quote, but Buck Showalter, the famous baseball manager, when he was running the Mets a few years ago, he had a great quote where they just asked him, think the team's going to keep hitting? You think they're going to keep winning games? And he said, the game always answers your questions. Our curiosity is always satisfied. MLS for the last few years does not feel like the games are answering our questions. Games feel completely random. The games feel like, every team is just, it's one of their 3 games this week to go with their Leagues Cup and Open Cup games. It's one of, their latest rotated squad featuring their new Hungarian U21 international who no one's heard of. And, everybody's just kind of winging it. And, not compelling stuff, especially when, more than half the league makes the playoffs. Again, it makes everything feel like kind of a roulette wheel. And it makes, caring or trying to analyze any of this seem beside the point.
You made me just realize right now there's so many issues that I haven't even thought about sports betting as a problem for this, like, for what we do, and that
For MLS?
yeah, and it is like, it definitely is like part of like the overall ubiquitous like creeping thing of it all. But it's also like, I don't know, like there's so many like other broader cultural problems going on that I didn't even like associate the various proliferation of sports betting, I feel like now, onto what might be part of the issues as well.
So I think this brings us to a good transition, especially the game always answers your questions, to our, what I'm calling our superlatives section of the program, where I've all right, so now we're entering the what I'm calling the superlatives section of this episode, where I've nominated a couple of things, a couple prompts to reflect on, and in the tradition of the game always answering your questions, the first thing I would like to ask is a favorite saying or cliche that we have referred to over the years. The game always answers our question was a late entry, a little bit there in the last couple seasons, but we've had a few across the years.
I'm
Well-
gonna say like, because I thought it was so over encompassing and because we still live in it, but the framing of the zone, the Armas zone, still stands for me.
I had not had forgotten about it entirely before we started recording, but then I had not been thinking of it under that category, but I do think it fits of whether or not we've exited.
Well, I mean, my personal favorite, mainly because I started it, was the when I was doing Once a Metro. It was the a name some of the older Red Bulls fans might remember, which became kind of like an all-encompassing just kind of template that a lot of people used. Which it can still just be like a standalone funny thing, but the kind of premise and joke of it when I started doing it was that part of the kind of malaise of following the Red Bulls and how the team got kind of stale and stalled during the post-COVID years was that every 5 minutes there would be this brand new signing, brand new hire, brand new thing that was happening at the club that would be completely forgotten about and abandoned within months. And it was kind of like, here's a name some of the older Red Bulls fans might remember. Samuel Tete. Here's a name some of the older Red Bulls fans might remember.
Whoa.
Dante Van Zer. I mean, there would be these things. The club, I mean, it was partially the club, office just overhyping things, partially, the bare bones media not really knowing what they were looking at, but people would get so excited about these, very mundane, banal things that would go on with Red Bulls, and then, sure enough, it would not prove to be that big of a deal, not that much longer later.
I think correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe I just projected a separate meaning onto this, but to me, I thought there was also a slight tinge of little bit of imitation of like a more nostalgia coded coverage of the team. That
was definitely an edge to it.
Will indulge with a little bit more of like shouting out, which over time naturally like became more sincere on our part. I think.
No, but I mean that definitely was part of the form, was just taking the voice of some obnoxious old head Red Bulls fan who was just like, oh well, you might think this is bad, but remember this, and it's like that was so fucking annoying by that time that yes, that was part of the joke.
Could we read the Daniel Picaro email? I feel like it's kind of relevant for the
the
ending part.
We can jump into our emails. So we did solicit some emails here that we were going to intersperse through this section here because many of them include questions that overlap with it. Peaches, do you want me to read it, or are you?
Read it.
All right. So from Daniel Pecoraro, who kindly writes, "Dear Brit, Cork, Peaches, and Sam, it's tough to think of a show that better encapsulates the state of my RBNY fandom than View from 202, even though my view in Harrison is typically from 103. I always
Thank
welcomed."
you, Daniel.
Yeah, little known fact, Cork actually sits in 103, even to this day. Or his ticket is there.
It was too expensive to change the name of the podcast.
I always welcome the irreverent appreciation and armchair analysis for this dumb, corporate, hapless, but at times joy-inducing club, especially in that what might have been season of 2018. As the decade of MLS rolls on and the unexpected bizarro world Metro of 2024 became the sub-mediocrity of 2025, I felt my interest in the club wane in what seems to be kind of the same state as U4. There's only so many years of 20-plus minute headways on the path to see a team that's coming in like 6th in the East and then bouncing out of the first round. What's filled it isn't all nostalgia. Sky Blue / Gotham's arrival from Piscataway to Sports Illustrated Stadium was a welcome addition and, of late, a chance to see a club with ambition win stuff. But times are rough for the club I grew up watching, and the before clearly outweighing the after. So with that in mind, I will close by remembering some guys from over the course of the life of the pod.
I just wanted to make sure that we got to some remembering guys from the fans.
Oh, we're definitely going to, yeah. I have to say, we did hit a couple of these themes pretty neatly already, didn't we? So, the guys in question, we got Ronald Zubar.
To this day, we still have the Zubar conjugation shirt on our website.
The website, yeah. Ambroise Oyango. Very, very
Oyango. Peculiar.
I will say, dare I suggest too significant a player because his assist to BWP in 2013, very critical assist, or 2014, against SKC.
But before our podcast.
Yes, but
So.
formative player though in that he was traded for Sasha Kleshin.
Yeah.
Eric Alexander, who Shep once called Eric Andrews, like that guy that I forgot. Frederick O'Branson.
That's a guy I forgot.
That's a guy where that he was here arguably at the peak of my RBNY fandom, but I feel like I was just like slightly less focused those 6 weeks he was here, and I like missed the memo where Jesse was like, this guy's going to be a big deal. He's going to be important. So when he left, I was like, yeah, obviously, but everyone was like, no, they're setting him up to be the big thing. Reese Buckmaster. That really tall dude, Matt Nacita.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Jason Pendant, who
Yeah.
hung around here. Fidel Escobar. Wow, that was...
Yeah.
I got really into Fidel Escobar there and him leaking things accidentally and just like always being on his phone.
What was that one random like rumor mill AI bot or whatever that was like, oh, Fidel Escobar might come back to RBNY?
Really?
That was
Fidel
exciting.
Escobar was a iPad kid. I'm going to say it now. Sorry. Florian Villot and Vincent Bezecourt are two mid-major French guys. Yes, very good.
Valo's still playing in like USL somewhere. He's like 34, 35.
That's also a great example, too, of guys who like felt like a cooler and bigger deal because the club was good at the time. And then once there wasn't, it's like, oh, these guys, I don't know.
Just
People-
kind of hit a hot streak.
People started getting frustrated and taking their frustrations out on them. Sal Zizzo, I might also nominate as maybe above this tier. Josh Sims, that's a weird one. And, of course, Felipe, our king of the dark arts. That's my
What
note,
was
not Daniel's.
Felipe's like? Is he running like a travel agency or something, or like he was taking calls like in the middle of a game or something? Like I can't remember what it was, but it was pretty funny recently.
Daniel signs off, says all the warm wishes for whatever comes next, Daniel and Bay Ridge. Brooklyn. Thank you, Daniel. Proving we did have some other Brooklyn listenership on this show. Appreciate that note. Before we move on to other remembering guys, I also want to nominate something mentioned by another listener who mailed in, our friend Zav, who requested a shout out for salad as well, which I think really became the formative sign-off comment or saying of the show, must be salad. Shout out to Gustavo Guimaraes as well for documenting that. You know, I think sincerely as well, like this is the kind of thing that there's like less and less just like interviews with random players now that like can be the source material for something like accidentally quite insightful and but also beautifully mundane, which if you don't remember, must be salad is the phrase that we're talking about. And it comes from an excerpt in a Gustavo article where he interviewed Elias Manuel, another player who, strange career outcome, but I would say too significant to be a cult player, where he was describing his arrival in the club and said that, I didn't really speak English, I didn't really know my way around, and I didn't really have anyone helping me, and I was looking at the menu for the food at the hotel, and I didn't know how to read any of it, but then I saw something that said salad, and I thought, must be salad. That became our descriptor of everything ever since then, and boy, it really has been salad still.
Just hard to tell what you're looking at. It doesn't seem terrible, but it also doesn't seem very good or coherent.
But then it
must be salad.
It's also, it just is what it is at the end of the day.
Right.
It's frustratingly, the game is not answering your questions, but it also has no subtext underneath
Cutting up
it.
the salad play-by-play was one of throwing salad was one of my
The Dennis Eckersley mashup. I will say, I do. If we could do it again, I think we could have made that half as long. But I think it was.
Well, it was a little
formative
bit
text.
like a dream sequence to start it, right? That's a cold open.
That's true.
Speaking of Eckersley, Richard Eckersley is on my list of remembering guys.
Ooh. Richard Eckersley retiring to run like a eco-tourism thing in Ontario. Also very previous era of North American soccer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, since we've...
Damn, why didn't Tesho Akindele ever play for us?
Dude, Tesho Akindele and me are gonna hang out eventually. We're gonna be at Yimby Town next year. It's gonna be sick.
YimbyCon.
Talking about Yimby Town is a real conference in New Haven, Connecticut. It was there last year.
Are you gonna ask him to come onto the pod?
We could absolutely get him here in 5 minutes. I'm telling you right now. We haven't even talked about EDSS yet, but like, I mean, that's another note I wanted to hit about the show as well, is that we over, you know, you can get anyone to show up to your podcast, really. And our good friend Ben Meinstan really like demonstrated this by his sincerely excellent energy drink soccer show. And if anyone is like actually looking for a time capsule of what I think was a very fun period in following the Red Bulls, I recommend tracking down some episodes of Energy Drink Soccer Show. I'm sure there's still going to be segments of like interviews talking about particular games that will no longer be fun, but I think there's good stuff. I mean, BMS was very funny, just like has a sort of it factor to hosting it. But he also just like would invite people to come on a show and they would come on. And that's something we kind of chose not to do from the get-go. I think like we liked having a little bit more distance, but I think we also kind of part of my perspective when we started the show as well is that like by being a little bit more removed, I kind of wanted to support this like vision of the fan base, like there being a lot of people in the fan base who are like devoted but slightly more casual followers of the club all throughout the stadium. In our case, it was from literally 202, hence the name of the show. They're not necessarily like the people who are like taking photos in front of the South Ward every time, or like there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but like they're not the people in like the fan promos, but there's tons of people who have a very like intense devoted relationships to the club where it's like a ritual part of their lives. And I think we wanted to put a spotlight on that sort of relationship with the club rather than like being sort of an interview show and like on-camera personalities and stuff like that. So that's why we didn't invite Tesho Akindele on the show. That said, I am going to immediately start getting into Yimby content with Tesho starting tomorrow.
In the new era of View from 202, we are cloud chasers, and we're going to be making TikTok dance shorts.
Yeah, I got to optimize all of my shorts. If it doesn't get top views, we're not posting it. Yeah. We've actually been posting episodes every week, but they haven't been hitting our metrics, so we delete them 5 seconds later.
The thumbnail and headline combo, it doesn't work.
Speaking of some other cult figures, I think let's go to Juan's email too. Our friend Juan Escalante wrote us saying, "Dear Brit, Peach, Sam, and Cork, well, if it isn't another podcast brought to a halt by cancel culture, and by cancel culture, I mean you all canceling your season tickets because you accepted the RBNY Comms Teams challenge of finding something better to do than watch the 2024 to 2025 roster in person."
I got worried there for a second. Juan was really uncovering the secret that we lost all of our USAID funding.
No, too real. If you'll allow me a Lampardian transition, I guess the View from 202 has gotten much worse. Haha, no, but seriously. This show seemed like the first time I felt represented in the RBNY media ecosystem, and you expanded what we thought was possible within this fandom. You should be immensely proud for this show's body of work. You tapped into a unique subculture around this club that punched above its weight for a while, seamlessly weaving between astute, inquisitive tactics discussion, earnest assessments of the supporter experience, and whatever the hell you guys were doing based on The Wicker Man. And despite that subculture's relation to the team drastically changing, it definitely hasn't disappeared. It's just gone back to goofing around in the stands, at the tailgates, on away trips, on the path rides home, and within group chats and chat rooms. My ASC GeoGuessr teammates, stay cool and have a great summer. Appreciate that one. It's very nice. I'm glad to hear that there's some sort of lasting influence that we've had along those lines. He then signs off with a postscript. "We shouldn't let a moment of communal remembering dudes slip us by. What goal by an otherwise fairly unremarkable RBNY player do you have locked in your brain? I think of Fabio's violent volley at home against Nashville." That's a pretty good one.
Ooh, that is a good one.
I have two from the same game.
I think I know what one of them's going to be.
Which one is it?
It's going to be the namesake of one of your jerseys. none other than Ben Mines. Right?
No, but that's a good shout.
Yeah.
That is a good shout.
Ben Mines for the 3-0. Yeah.
Well, my shout was like Gideon Ba and Gonzalo Verón on the 7-0.
Gideon Ba. 7-0 is pretty peak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you also have him signed on your ticket.
That's right. I got all of the hardest players signed.
The only ones you didn't get were Jesse and Alex. Well, you got Jesse. You didn't get Alex Muil and
I don't think I got
BWP?
Dax.
You didn't get Dax? Is that?
Yeah, I didn't. It was all the Americans that I
Yeah.
didn't get, so I could still do it. And Lloyd Sam almost had an 8th in that match too.
Mm-hmm.
Before that match, when we used to do predictions, we asked what it was, and I half jokingly, was like 8-0. Lloyd Sam, if this were Uncut Gems, I would be chasing you down for some serious cash. Well, now I'm thinking of good goals that this was by a significant player, so it's a wrong answer. But like for some reason, Kaku's second goal against Tijuana really seared into the brain. Especially it was like his second game or something, or his first game. It was in those all white kits, really clean. It was like, if not I don't think it was a first time volley, but it was just really clean in the corner.
You can steal my Ben Mines goal if you want.
That's pretty good. I don't know if it's seared. Yeah, that's one. The Carlos Rivas
I'm thinking of the same one.
double. Was it a double? Also pretty good. Those are from like the same. Was it the same game?
I think it was.
It was the same game as Ben.
It was
Mines.
rotation in between those
Yes.
champions.
It's either that one or the RSL game was the snow game, right?
But we lost that game.
Yeah.
Mark Shakovsky, that's a guy.
Oh,
He
wow,
played in
that's
that
a guy.
Under
There
the
are a lot
right
of
circumstances, he looked good, and then they just tried to make him be the main character, one of the main characters of the team in 2019. But yeah, the Carlos Rivas. I mean, again, that's another case where just like everything seemed really fun when the team was good, and you can have sort of these goofy players come in and do incredible things. Oh,
Damn. You just reminded me of when I randomly went to RPM Raceway and go-karted against Tchaikovsky.
I've got one.
Daniel Royer.
I think they played another game later, which is annoying. But what was at one time the final game at RFK Stadium, which was Mohamed Keita.
I was thinking about that too.
Sick assist from Murillo.
It was Keita assisting Murillo.
Keita.
It was a give and go, and then a chip.
That's
that was literally going to be my answer.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine.
But
I would have been way more long-winded.
That's
Murillo's a pretty significant player, but
Yeah,
the
he
Keita
was.
assist is yeah.
That's how I got to it. I was
Yeah.
thinking like, what was the best Keita moment?
was-
And then yeah.
What was I don't think Mike Grella counts in this kind of category as a cult player. But there was that goal that he scored where it was like right when he just got on the field and the announcer like didn't know who it was. They said like, oh, he's just like,
just the guy who came on the field. He just like chipped from like halfway in Columbus.
that
right?
was the
Yeah.
1,000th goal.
yeah, the 1,000th goal.
That's the poster I have still that's signed by like half of that team. Grella, I think like he fits a definition of cult player for sure. He's not like the most rare like sicko choice, I guess, if I have to use a framing
yeah.
I don't love, but I think he like definitely counts to some extent. As we think of more cult players, I mean, we can expand this to just cult players in general. I think Carlos Rivas clearly is a formative one. There was a period in 2018 where like we were joking about him cheesing a bunch and posted his photo, and we should say that we do have a Discord among our friends in RBNY world, and kind of where what was once referred to as the RBNY Super League, podcast Super League, we were all in there, and our most popular like sort of default reaction to things that we like is a little isolated PNG of Carlos Rivas's head making that smile. So he really has just like lived on. He was my avatar for like almost like 7 years at some point. He changed it the other week. It's a sign of the times.
He's too significant of a player, but I think the fact that if you modify him to the bearded Reyes.
Reyes, we can't claim. Yeah, shout out to BMS again for
Yeah.
that. That was really informative, and also a good reminder that there were there were interspersed periods of good vibes still for longer than I remember. You know, the bearded Reyes lasted through the Struber.
My favorite is like sometimes like Profe Mapu would just get a picture of Reyes and be like, "Hey, BMS, beard him."
Oh yeah, one of my biggest regrets is that they were doing a thing at the stadium that was like childhood photos, and one of them was Reyes, and I could not get my phone out fast enough to take a photo, so then we could then beard it, and I stay up at night thinking about that. I was like half a second too late, and I really, really just missed the opportunity there. All right, Colt players are welcome as you think of any as we go on. We'll certainly get more. But how about let's think about just favorite or notable players in general. By notable, I mean it can be someone who's indicative of a particular moment, even if they weren't necessarily your favorite. One that comes to mind for me is a person I wrote a piece about actually for Once a Metro eventually when he left, which was Alex Muyl, which that's one of those things where I'm glad I did end up finally writing that, and I think that I would be kicking myself if I just let that idea sort of wander away in my head. But I think he was a really indicative player of like what made that era of the Red Bulls very compelling. The local angle, I think, also was very compelling. I did a bit in that piece. I did a bit of a compare contrast with Gonzalo Verón as well that I don't fully remember, but I thought it was quite tidy at the time of just like kind of the dueling perceptions of like what a role player on the team and what they needed to do was. But I do think that Muyl getting traded to Nashville was one of several sort of punctuation points that ended that period of the Red Bulls, and to me, he will always stick out for sure.
You kind of stole mine, but I like kind of to that note. I feel like Felipe is also indicative of an era because in a way, I feel like when I got into the team, it felt like Dax McCarty was kind of that main midfield guy, and it was interesting that the person that was the future turned out to be like Felipe, who when he came in, I thought that like Sasha and Dax would probably be playing in like the dual pivot, and Felipe is probably a better 10, and it turned out like whatever kind of silly FIFA like preconceptions I've had of players were disproven by the game ahead of me.
That also takes me back to that era where we had the yearly tradition of trading away one of our major midfielders.
Yeah,
and it was a source of like pretty fierce debate about like, well, one, like, is Red Bull like doing these players wrong, or like are they like being cheap? But also two, there ended up being a sort of meta debate of like, did we do it in the right order to make room for the right guys? And I think over time, I remember becoming amenable to the idea that we should have traded Felipe first and then Dax the next season, instead of Dax being the first guy to go. Also, Dax was just one of my favorite players, generally. I haven't really watched his tenure on Apple at all, so I don't know if...
He's a good analyst.
Yeah. Any other favorites?
Felipe was the one I was going to choose. So
we're on the train.
We're really just
we're on
doing
the train.
it. But I just feel like people like in that back line in like the 2016-17 like era, you could really name people we have brought up today: Kemar Lawrence, Damian Paranel.
Paranel's my answer.
Like these are just like I just feel like that was such a cool point where we just had like rock solid.
It's also cool that Kemar Lawrence was only good when he played here.
Yeah.
Also, him being discovered also felt like like in that 2015 team, it felt like in that era of MLS, there were a couple ways you could find good players. You could pay top dollar for a DP. You could pay and like get like a above average MLS player like Dax McCarty and Sasha Kleshin, and then like you could do smart scouting and pick up like peripheral CONCACAF guys that are flying under the radar like Kemar Lawrence. And then, like, you still had a little bit of, like, the draft picks, like Chris Duval and stuff like that, putting it together.
He was a trialist, right?
He was a trialist, yeah. And it was, like, there was a stretch there where, like, the club was doing pretty well with its trialists, and you felt, like, relatively assured that they would find some good guys in that trialist thing, and that was a shame when it kind of came to an end.
Yeah.
Should we give a shout out to Damien Paradal's formative quote?
Yeah, that's another one like the Carlitos, where, which maybe even throw that into the phrase mix from earlier, where it's, he kind of said it, he tweeted it out. Public in the United States is childish.
I mean, that is why we're doing this now. Is that everyone is 12?
Everyone is 12.
he was the
first.
Clocked it. Yeah.
And then a critical. So this is the image that's screen capped on Cork's banner on Twitter, and I think a really piece de resistance on it is the tag that says misleading.
Yeah.
that RMLS put on there.
Yeah, like don't worry, it wasn't being that mean, guys.
Yeah. There was that's another part of the American soccer culture story that will have to be left for another day. Is just like the fact that I used to read RMLS a ton, and then for no particular reason, just like stopped looking at it entirely.
Well, and also just to bookend the Baronell thing, it's still a very funny image that I will continue to use, probably till I die. But Baronell himself once got in my replies when somebody was having fun with that and said, "Oh yeah, they did kind of misquote me there." And I was like, come on, man! Like, you never meet your heroes. Yeah,
You're cool with us. You don't have to admit to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
we think it's great. Yeah, you were spot on.
So now we can move on to an email from our friend Lens, an RBNY Podcast Super League member himself from Metrofan TV. Lens writes, "Greetings from Singapore and congrats on outlasting all the other RBNY Podcast Super League members. 10 years is truly a hell of a run. Feels like it was just yesterday that we were kicking back in Peach's apartment, recording that marathon session on anime and tryharding on Catan after. Crazy to think that was 7 years ago now. My question then is, rooted in the overall experience as fans, following this team for over a decade now, what is your fondest game day memory that is not related to anything going on the pitch? Mostly angling for away day hijinks or shenanigans behind the old warehouses in Harrison, if any. If you know, you know. The players and personnel keep changing, but the memories are eternal. Perhaps the real MLS Cup is truly the friends we made along the way. Peace."
Oh, I miss Lens.
Yeah.
As
I
do
liked-
I.
I liked his Kaku airport visit. That's another great avatar of how the scale of things was different in a better way in the 2010s than it is now.
Kaku es más
That
grande.
also, Bill Reese t-shirts I will put up there alongside Jason RBNY videos of being like emblematic of like RBNY Twitter monoculture days.
Yeah.
Had a similar kind of tone.
Man, the anime episode.
Oh, so sorry.
We couldn't do the anime episode now because we would do like Blue Lock, and that's like a fascist. It has like fascist undertones.
Oh, that's an anime?
Yeah, it's like this new soccer anime.
We did do a long analysis of
Giant Killing.
Giant Killing, a story about RBNY.
Documentary.
Yeah, I always kind of wish that we would could branch out more into like film reviews or stuff, and like we were considering doing that. Once we got disillusioned with the team a little bit, we haven't quite put it together. But that's an example of something that if you get an episode plopped in your feed, maybe it'll be because we saw a movie that we thought was interesting. But unfortunately, they don't really make good movies anymore.
That's right. Marty's Supreme review coming next week with Timothy Chalamet on the podcast. He's everywhere.
There was that 2-week window there where Juan, who emailed us earlier, had found the video of Chalamet doing the
Soldier
Boy dance with Alex Muyl, and we kept it in to us just as an inside joke. Feels insane that people never do that. They would put it on Discord and try to, I don't know,
pump it.
Yeah.
Favorite
away days. There's a few a couple of DC trips in 2015 and 16 were good. Stealing the Pope. Which we were tagged along on that. There was just a cutout of the Pope at the
Delaware Memorial Rest Stop.
The Joe Biden, pre-Joe Biden days. Memorial Rest Stop.
It was just the Delaware Welcome Center then.
Yeah. That was taken and then put into the stands I think because of the chant, DC United went to Rome to see the Pope. That was pretty fun, but we were kind of external to that. I think it was the 2016 trip. Last time I got quite drunk, that in a way that I didn't enjoy. Did not vomit though. So that's a win on that count. But had quite a bit of fun at that.
I had a really good time. I did the Cascadia trip with some of our friends. That was really nice. We got to see like the Timbers Army, like where they make their tifos and everything. Like they were real cool about it, which is kind of like nice, I guess, to have maybe like that Western Conference like relationship with a team where you could be like, oh, this is like we're just like supporters or whatever. Although I don't even know what Timbers Army is like now, so maybe like this is like endemic to all of MLS, where all the supporters have like an issue. But
Kash Patel has listed them as a terrorist organization. Yeah, I mean, that's like honestly very plausible.
Honestly,
yeah. While wearing his Liverpool
in Portland,
tie.
Maybe it's the National Guard is in the supporters section, cutting the trees down or whatever. But I enjoyed the Cascadia trip. I was gonna say this is a trip that maybe is like both like liked in memory for me, but also very cursed.
There's a curse prompt.
Well, I know. Yeah. This is, I think, maybe for both of it, but like the Perkins trip is both.
Yes. The Philadelphia. Partially, what is so interesting about the Philadelphia trips is that we did 2, if not 3, within like a year.
Yeah.
And I cannot distinguish them in my mind.
No.
Yeah.
They all just
one of them was a playoffs game too.
Yeah. One of them was the playoff game where it was the last minute.
That was the Perkins.
Okay.
That was the Perkins one?
Yeah.
That one.
Oh.
I think that
was the one where we it was disaster. Then we went over to try to go to Cracker Barrel, and they were like had no staff. Nobody's.
And then
working.
we went to the Taco Bell that had 50 people.
Right.
And then the Popeyes was not open yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and then that also combined with just like bad post-COVID vibes, particularly the Cracker Barrel, where we were like, none of us have been to Cracker Barrel. They still have the logo. Even at the time, we were like, they still have the old logo. We got to go before they change the logo, right? And then like we got there and just like everyone was overworked, and it was like the kind of deal. Yeah, the restaurant was empty, but they were like, we have 2 people here, so the wait's like an hour, and we were like, oh man,
okay,
the world is not. All right, and then I had probably one of the worst meals I've ever had in my life at Perkins, which I'd never heard of before then.
Me neither, but my patty melt was 4 out of 10.
And then we tried to, like when we were leaving, we got lost in some sort of one-way street that was called John Galt Way, and it was next to like a park and ride station on the light rail. This is different from the other trip. I think there was one Philadelphia away trip before that
where we also
was, like,
went on John Galt Way.
Truly the first. It was like legitimately one of the first like post-COVID things I feel like I did, where I went out and like went in the world. And on the way back, we stopped at one of the rest stops on the turnpike, and the only place that was open was a Roy Rogers, which I had never been to before. And it was like, it looked closed, but then there was just like one guy way in the back clanging pans, and he was like, oh yeah, you want some food? We have like 3 burgers. And we took them. I don't even remember how we paid, if we paid. Like
I remember those burgers.
Only like half the lights were on in the whole thing, and it did feel a little bit like the world was ending.
That might have been the last Roy Rogers, like
probably. It's that moment and Chris Christie eating at the Roy Rogers that are like my 2 associations of that. Any other good away days?
DC trampoline. When we were...
That was 15.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you mentioned in that era.
Yes.
I very much agree. Those games were a blast. But just even going to RFK and then being like where there was like just major structural deficiency where you really felt like it was going to collapse.
Oh my God, yeah.
And it was like legitimately terrifying.
I'm not convinced we didn't die that day, and then this has just been
that would line up
afterlife. Yeah,
that would timeline wise. That was like
I have been saying that I have a theory, and this is just because I think I watched Lost when I was a child, that COVID was purgatory for everyone.
Oh sure.
Yeah.
I fondly remember our Montreal trip. We might have done 2.
We've done 2. We did 2.
We did a bigger one where I think
with, like,
we all
a couple of my friends.
Yeah.
I met a friend.
and then an ex-girlfriend
Yes.
of mine.
Oh,
and, yeah. And we like went up to my parents' house
Yes.
on the way, and then we stayed up in Montreal like for the few days. Like,
Right. I
couple
remember
days
having a
leading up.
very good cookie from your mother.
Yep.
The game was uneventful, but the trip was lovely.
Yeah.
Game was quite bad.
We
Right?
had
like,
so much poutine on that trip.
yeah.
It was
Yeah.
ridiculous.
And I
so
was,
much.
yeah. And I don't know. As a fan of like weird old decrepit buildings, like the dome was cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It was
whenever
cool that we got to see the Olympic Stadium every time we went there, but I never saw a game at Stade Saputo to this day.
Yeah, I was like, wow, this is where Grimes did her music video. If only we knew. And then, like, the city away days are always pretty fun.
Yeah.
First couple ones were really exhilarating. 7-0 was exhilarating.
7-0, I was just laughing the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great.
I did.
We saw Kalen Carr afterwards outside.
Yep.
I very drunkenly chatted him up.
Wasn't that when Florian Velo and
Oh,
Vincent
yeah.
Bezecourt were both up in the upper deck when we saw them like walking around?
Oh, that one NYCFC away trip where we got onto the subway afterwards and like a bunch of the players, like Drew, just sat near us because they were like, "Oh, we saw the fight outside," and then we just like
Yeah, there
saw.
used to be fights. Wow.
Yeah.
Remember. I was looking for an excuse to mention Dax McCarthy is innocent. That
waiting
YouTube
for the
poop
drop.
video,
Yeah.
which I sort of maybe beaten to the ground a little bit, but that just reminded me that was made after the first round of derbies against City, which timeline-wise feels wrong. It feels like it's from an even older era of internet, but I guess that was quite some time ago. But there was a period in that video that featured like the fight between GSU and
The sandwich board incident.
yeah.
GSU. Wow.
Dax McCarthy is innocent is like a more extreme version of like the RBNY old monoculture that sort of existed, which again, very different from the club culture that exists today. We've covered Cursed and
Did we cover Cursed Away Day or Cursed Day?
I just brought one
I guess
up.
we brought
brought
one.
it
I
up,
mean,
yeah.
we've
Any other Cursed
The one I
ones?
would also just add is the Undateables.
Oh,
That I went to.
Wow,
because,
we've done so much of this show. I've forgotten.
right? Oh my god! Talk about a
Wandy.
cursed game. Wandy. That was also like when Chris Armas first took over. It was a month in, and it was his first derby game,
yeah.
and we lost.
Wow. I forgot
It's
you
the
were
first time
on-
we ever lost to NYCFC.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
then we had nominated Sam for the Time Out New York Undateables thing where they nominated one fan from each fan base and they set you up in a so I feel kind of bad about that because I feel like you didn't realize until like we came back the next podcast and they did an interview.
Yeah.
And then I like read aloud the interview and you didn't realize that I was going to do that.
No, I
until
did not.
we-
I did not realize that. And my answers were very different than hers, and I was trying to be such a good sport about the whole thing because, like, there's a bit of a disparity.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You were also very diplomatic about the date itself. And
Right.
You were like, yeah, maybe we'll see each other. And then she was like,
right, which is so funny.
yeah. Rude of her.
Yeah.
But,
Wow. I'm surprised you didn't turn into some red pill content creator
I
after
could've.
that. That's you could have been rich.
yeah. Also, twist, I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe this I don't think it's too detailed. But apparently the person you went on a date with ended up marrying some other...
like an ESC guy.
An ESC guy, yeah.
Yeah.
So there you go. Could have been you, I guess. But
What could have been?
yeah. Oh, man.
We've made some content.
Wow. All right, let's one thing that we're dancing around. I guess like I have a question of like what was like a peak period of like club culture in the show, and I guess there were a few things mentioned like the energy drink soccer show. I just want to give a shout out for that period, and also that coincided with the period that Juan is referring to with the Wicker Man reference. Where I did quite enjoy the period where we were doing the sort of surreal stories and
Yeah.
everything.
When we put effort into our storytelling.
Yeah, or like I left for the summer and I came back and I had this whole spiel I launched into
Yeah.
about Pat Benjamin, R.I.P. Although, I'm of the opinion Pat Benjamin is not proved to be dead. We just haven't heard from him in
Not
a
at
while.
all, yeah.
Yeah, he's still out there.
Maybe he's writing about something else.
Yeah, and it will be released in due time. And like all this
redacted.
stuff, I think one of my superlatives I've teed up for myself is like favorite bit or story we did on the podcast, and I think the Wicker Man one is my favorite one that we did. Although like the post road trip one I was quite fond of. There were a few that we did in the peak period of COVID that I felt absolutely like delirious, like I'd gone insane just because I hadn't really like interacted with anyone that whole time. That's when most of these were written.
Yeah.
This wasn't even really a bit, but just like when we were rumored to be signing Fernando Pol, and we just
Pol Pot
Fernandez, just lost my mind and was like, I need to go outside.
Pusetto Watch was pretty funny. People just randomly go into like Times Square.
I mean, that was the peak, though.
It
was peak.
That was when it felt like the club was firing on the most cylinders right after signing Gaku, just putting the finishing touches on a well-built team.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also fun on the internet in kind of a dovetailing way.
Going on the computer used to be fun. Like
remember the internet? No.
That was also like the peak period, because like in 2018 we also sort of migrated over to our Discord server, which I think like Twitter is just different than it was across the board anyway, but like I do think that like RBNY Twitter just like fractured a little bit just because like of how different people go. Now that the club itself runs its own Discord, but we were like really geared up about like those early Discord days where because initially it wasn't just like, now it's just turned into a larger group chat for us, but initially it was like a larger subject section of people that we weren't necessarily friends with. It was just sort of like we had curated an RBNY Twitter like chat room of larger people all engaged in Pusetto Watch. That was pretty delirious too. What a time that was. I also nominated least timeless story / bit, and my nomination for this is when I had a sprawling story that was like a Sopranos thing, but set at Brasilia,
I vaguely remember
place
this.
in the Ironbound that we go, and then it was also like a Mulholland Drive thing that got injected in there, and then the other final ingredient was repeated references to Wigan Kebab, which was a viral Twitter video for about like 6 weeks in that year that is now just stuck in that story for some reason. And it'll be like when people go and watch SNL episodes from like 30 years ago and they're like, what the hell are they talking about? Inevitably people will do that with the Wigan Kebab story.
When we were doing favorite bits, I was going to say, like, this is definitely a bit and not just me losing track of my thoughts, but my favorite bits are when I go on long stories that don't go anywhere.
Oh, I was going to nominate that for the Dax McCarty number retirement. That was a fun recent moment.
There were some good unintentional Shaggy Dog stories. I think I vaguely remember this. I can't quite remember what the kicker was.
I'll pull it up later.
Okay. That was
But yeah, those were totally intentional, listener, in case you were wondering. I definitely planned all of those.
Yeah, that was good. I also really enjoyed we mentioned EDSS as well, and I really enjoyed going on there. And like, this sort of happened accidentally, but I just ended up like picking a different Charlie Kaufman movie every time and like retelling the plot of that movie to BMS, and like BMS didn't know it was a movie, so he just thought I was like really creative, and he just thought I made up the plot of being John Malkovich, but like tweaked to like a Red Bull context. And he was like, "How did you think of that?" And I was like, "Man, I feel great. I feel on top of the world. I feel so smart."
Every time he used to play, let's play a game, I just heard it as like a jigsaw kind of.
Oh yeah, it's incredible.
Sinister.
I did. Speaking of Charlie Kaufman, though, I did just watch an adaptation a couple months ago when I was thinking about doing this episode, and I dreamed up this big sort of thing about how it's this sprawling movie about like meta commentary and adapting something that you realize can't be adapted, and finishing a task that shouldn't be finished, that ends in this surreal thing, and I escalation instead of like a real resolution. And I was like, this is perfect. I'm gonna like have BMS call me and like pretend that like Don Garber is like kept Pat Benjamin captive, and it'll be like this crazy like chase that ends the show and everything. Obviously that didn't happen, but I just wanted everyone to know that I did think of a final tie-in for that ultimately.
I'm sad we never did our Jochen Schneider and Sandra Schwartz as the Lighthouse duo.
Yeah, we did have we had a bit with Kaku's agent, who's a guy whose name I can't remember.
Scott
that, like,
Pearson.
It was the other guy. It was like the Argentine guy.
I've blanked.
Where I was like... Casasola, where I was like... I think I'm going to call in and like pretend to be like a rude Argentine on the phone. And then like we did it, and then I was like, I can't think of an actual joke. Like, so we just like let that one die. And that was probably a good move on our part. I will say on favorite away day as well is when I went and watched RBNY away for one of the rare losses in the 2018 season with BMS and Haddad in Houston. And BMS sat there mostly quietly and then tapped the kid. There's a kid sitting in front of us on the road and tapped him on the shoulder and just asked him if he listened to podcasts and if he listened to the Energy Drink Soccer Show. The kid was so confused.
Who took the picture of the
I
kid?
did.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was gonna say
Like
that's one of the most. I'm someone who does a lot of street photography in my spare time, but I've never seen someone catch the decisive moment quite like that.
It's an evocative moment because again, it's like in that story, of course, BMS became like a judge type figure from Blood Meridian, where he was became larger in life. It was inspired by a true event. All right. Any other final superlatives? We got a couple other moments, a couple other emails to read. Favorite or least favorite RBNY memes? We've kind of been hitting on this a little bit.
That's been covered.
Yeah. I never did my review of every RBA food item thing on our blog.
That's okay. I think we got it covered. Let's close it out with a couple emails for now. First, from our dear friend Pat Haddad, who writes, "Hi guys, View from 202 and Cork's work with Once a Metro were my preferred accompaniments to Red Bulls games throughout the seasons, where being a fan was something I took very seriously. I appreciate the way that both the show and the articles were a breath of fresh air in a sports media scene, dominated by performatively, or maybe sincerely, miserable suburbanites. It's thanks in no small part to you guys that the Red Bulls actually were a cool thing to be into in the 2010s. Thanks for all the work that you guys put in over the years to make these projects happen. Nobody did it like you guys did. Cheers, Pat."
Thanks, Pat. Never forget that I named off the perch, Pat.
Yeah, we should say Pat is of course another podcast Super League member, along with Chris, who is our final email. He writes, "I just wanted to thank you guys for the near decade of content that always came from a place that matched what the club deserved at any given moment in time. You guys paved the way for me to even consider talking about this club in front of a microphone. On top of all that, I had the privilege to become friends with you guys and experience the ups and downs of this club with you all, and just life in general. We still need to figure out the next time we can go to get some Rodizio. Is there a Rodizio place near City Field? Or maybe catch some darts. I hope for the day that this club isn't so bad at everything it does and finds a way to appeal again to both short-term suburban families, for some reason, and, working adults from the city. Anyways, thanks again for everything. Love you all, and I'll leave you with one question. What are your thoughts on candles on auto ship? This is no longer in place, by the way." Thanks, Chris. That's last one is a bit of an inside joke we have, and I think if we look at the trend, Chris, I think we may need to put the candles back on auto ship in order to fix the trend here. I think the line was going up when the candles on auto ship were going up, and now everything's going down. So we may need to spend more money on candles once again.
We do have one other final message that we got on the Discord from Profe Mapu.
Oh, yes. I think we covered, yes.
We covered most of the topics.
But let's read it as well. Another podcast Super League member to close us out. I think this could uncover a last stone for us as well. How much, Profe writes, how much were the changes in media landscape with less media cover the team affect the production of View from 202, even when you were such an independent voice there? And how much has View from 202 changed? Less engaged crowd.
The literal View from 202.
Yes.
Well, I think this might be something I think best from Cork's perspective. Like, how do you feel in terms of media side, having been someone on both like the inside now to seeing where the landscape is?
Well, I mean, I don't want to repeat myself too much from what I said earlier in the episode about some of that stuff, but I mean, yeah, I mean, there's been very little like actual intermediate writing or, you know, actual analysis of the team and the league for a long time. I think those sort of spaces where people have room to do something that's a little more sophisticated than just doing basic game recaps and interview recaps, and something a little less than being a full-on, you know, multimedia publication. I think those spaces just exist less and less, and I think it's definitely dampened the energy of the team. I don't I can't really, like a lot of things about the team, I just can't really get myself in a lather about it much these days. But yeah, it sucks when there's not a lot of chatter out there. I mean, there's only so much you can do. I mean, that was part of why I started doing O&M, was OAM, because it felt like there wasn't as much of that going on, you know, certainly since people like, you know, back in, you know, when I was a kid, Yves Galarsep and his blog was kind of covered a lot of that turf and had, you know, straight news, but also kind of putting things in context and the kind of things that journalism is supposed to be. And losing that and the generations of OAM even before me, and even, you know, people like Christian Dyer who were more kind of educated about the game and could offer viewpoints. Losing all that has been, you know, pretty difficult to build club culture around. So
yeah, and I think to that point, like when we brought up the Gustavo,
it's hard for us to have stuff to be a foil to,
right?
As we've kind of introduced earlier in the episode.
Like we reacted off of the Gustavo interview about salad,
right?
Like that whole bit. Like we don't have like stuff like that to go off of anymore.
Yeah, like Extra Time Radio, we used to listen as just to bounce out. We used to have almost an abundance of things in a way. Like
we used to be about media literacy.
Well, I used to like listen to Seeing Red every week, and the reason why I stopped doing it was not because I disliked the show or anything, but just because I found myself on this show being like, oh, on Seeing Red they said this, and that was interesting, but let's think about it this way. And I found it a bit boring to be constantly referencing something else, or like, you know, that I thought it might suit everyone a little bit better to kind of just like come in blind, so to speak. And often at that time, a lot of times I was citing things that I agreed with on Seeing Red. It wasn't like I thought they were bad, but I was like, oh, let's like build the library a bit. And that was coming from a period of relative wealth of like resources, which is crazy to think now. But speaking to the period of like what we felt like the peak period was as well, we kind of glossed over this in our chronology earlier, but like the culmination of the evolution of this show's voice as well, I think really was in 2019 when we brought Cork on as well, because like to that point we had kind of found our voice. We tried to like the please like my sport thing initially, and then we switched to like the EDSS boosting, and then when Cork came on in 2019, and then
I was already spit up and chewed out by the American soccer system by then, so
we brought in Crash Davis over here.
Yeah, exactly.
And but then we added kind of a little bit more. I think that was the best period of the show as well, because we still had a little bit of the club culture take and like the irreverence, but also we're finally able to match it a little bit with like a proper like journalism bit to complement it without being like a straight news thing. And also personally, I always just felt like we were better at like talking about like match day atmosphere and like being a fan of the club rather than X's and O's. So I think it was nice to have a little bit more substance there when we brought Cork in throughout the OAM tenure as well.
It was also the best period because Brit was gone for like 3 months.
That's true.
Yeah,
that was really the key piece, and I'm sorry to have ruined it. But I think that was great. And I think, like, also speaking to the peak period, like, to the question about the view from 202, and the very kind emails from all of our friends here that, like, there was, I can't remember which seasons it was exactly, but there was a really good stretch there where we would go and have our ritual of going to the games. In 202, we would have, like, a solid, like, dozen or so people that we knew and just like would come throughout the section at some point throughout the day, and we would just hang out with.
Yeah.
Even if it was like Chris, after like getting off the stand, would come up for the second half, or if Pat as well also like would do that too. And it felt like a nice little community that we had started. And then Sass Sass came on the show quite a few times himself as well, but I like to think he was a bit of a character on the show as well to people listening in, and that's kind of like really what I wanted to go for. Same with Haddad being a character on the show. I think I was like partially inspired. There was a Arsenal podcast called the Tuesday Club. Maybe they're still around. I don't know. And they were like a bunch of professional like comedians or something who were doing it as their side project. But the thing I always found interesting about it is just like the way they casually talked about like their experience going to the game and their friends, like, and offhand references and stuff, and like painted a picture of like regular people having regular lives. Then this was like integrated into that. Needless to say, we don't feel that way about the club anymore for ways we've talked about.
Which means that there are no regular people in 202 anymore.
Mostly.
They don't come.
Well, I'm sure there are, and I encourage people to do it. And then if I will permit ourselves to give a little bit of advice as well, if anyone is looking to like maybe take on a project of their own. Because I do remember when we started, I think the first time I actually thought that we could start doing this is that on an episode of Seeing Red, I think it was like Dan Dickinson was leaving, and they're giving him a little bit of send-off, and like one of them said like, oh, to anyone considering doing a podcast, like one format we thought worked really well is that like Mark asks the questions and Dan answers them, and like that is like a recommended like tried and true format. I was like, oh, maybe we could do something like that. And I went and took that and I said, I'm going to go ask the questions and answer them as well. But anyway, I think
well, now the game is answering our questions.
That's true. But I if anyone is out there thinking about doing a media podcast or a new RBNY thing, one, I would love it if there were people out there calling us old heads and that we're busted and chopped and unk and everything. I'm not aware of that. If there is that, go for it. But two, like I think like just have a unique voice and like try to provide that contextualization. I think from what I've seen, it seems like there's some people who are trying to do like a little bit of everything and maybe trying to like set their scope a little high and like having these like man on the street interviews and like a multimedia production, or constantly like trying to do like a magazine and like start small. Like we started as like just like a weekly thing where we didn't have big ambitions to like turn into a project, and I think that made it like achievable where we could do this project every week for 10 seasons ish, and like just start there and just try to like have
the content is more important than the form.
Yeah, for sure. And then
you get a form guy like me to put the content into the
and then
form.
like people if you want to have guests on, people will come on your podcast if you want that. You can just go for it. But really, like, especially in the podcasting scene as well, people seem to like the like hangout podcast vibe. Like you can go the hangout vibe, or you can go the like produced vibe. If you feel like you might not have limitless capacity, just go for the hangout vibe, and then just try to like record something every week and put it out there and have a distinct voice, and it could go a long way. And if you don't like it, that's no problem. You can go find and do something else. But I encourage people to give it a shot, to give something else in the space.
Also, I think in general, I found this through content creation myself. It's like you'll be surprised at how many people care or listen.
Yeah, I mean, we never like checked our numbers really, and like we could have like, as we mentioned, solicited more like feedback. We did that brief era where we were doing like watch parties and stuff. That was kind of fun. But these things I think do have like a longer tail than we think. So I mean, the most important thing is that if it just feels like a productive use of your time, and I think this did for a long time for us, and the reason we did is we enjoyed doing it. And we may still record more in the future, just not week in, week out, and not talking about the Red Bulls, maybe talking about the Mets and the Yankees or something instead. Well,
Go Knicks. FA Cup winners.
this has understandably been a long one because it is the series finale. But we still, if you want to say anything, the email is also not being dismantled, so feel free to still send anything in.
That's true. We have not deleted the Twitter account.
That's true. You
could
can
just
harass us there. But anyone have any parting thoughts before we sign off on this one?
I'm going to say this has not been very Metro at all.
And nor shall it be. All right, till next time, I guess.